Liderar a transformação. Ter coragem para desbravar novos caminhos. Ser pioneiro.
Essa é a energia da Petrobras há 70 anos.
Uma energia que está em quem faz parte dessa história. E é com essa energia que vamos liderar uma nova jornada, a da transição energética. Porque a gente sabe a importância de pensar no hoje.
Mas também sabe que é importante pensar no amanhã.
Porque quando a gente coloca a nossa energia em pesquisa e inovação, novas tecnologias viram novas fontes de energia. Quando a gente coloca energia nas pessoas, diversidade vira respeito, vira inclusão. E quando a gente coloca energia em dar o nosso melhor, o melhor acontece. No presente e no futuro, com uma transição energética justa.
Liderar uma transformação desse tamanho começa com uma energia.
A sua, a nossa. Petrobras, 70 anos. O Brasil é a nossa energia. Brasil, união e reconstrução.
In cities around the world, the promise of prosperity is under threat, with populations growing and resources pushed to their limits. Leaving us with the question, what will it take to create carbon-neutral, livable cities of the future? Explore how your city can benefit from urban resilience.
Um dos maiores e mais diversos biomas do mundo, com papel central no combate ao aquecimento global e às mudanças climáticas. O Bradesco está presente em todos os municípios da região amazônica promovendo inclusão. Na grande maioria, é a única instituição financeira a fornecer o serviço bancário. Essa atuação também está a bordo do barco Voyager, uma agência flutuante que atende moradores de comunidades remotas ao longo do Rio Solimões. No bioma Amazônia, o Bradesco é parte da vida dos ribeirinhos, provendo educação financeira, estímulo ao empreendedorismo, apoio às culturas sustentáveis. A Fundação Bradesco leva educação de qualidade à Amazônia por meio de 11 escolas físicas e também pela escola virtual. Apoiar a inclusão, o desenvolvimento e a preservação. Fazer diferença na vida das comunidades e das pessoas está no nosso propósito. Porque entre nós, você vem primeiro. Bradesco.
A energia da Equinor está em linha com a mudança, buscando energia mais limpa, alinhando eficiência com fontes renováveis, em linha com a inovação e com a diversidade. Nossa energia está em linha com um futuro melhor. A energia da Equinor.
Já parou para pensar para onde vai a nossa energia? A nossa energia incentiva descobertas, conquistas, promove inovações e gera encontros. E tão importante quanto descobrir para onde ela vai é saber de onde ela vem. Shell, energia que vem da gente.
Life is about balance. Balance between individual wants, collective needs, and the demands of our planet. But forget sacrifice or compromise. We combine the essential, the desirable, and the sustainable to ensure all life on Earth has what it wants and what it needs. At DSM Firmenich, we make delicious, nutritious food more accessible to all. We help farmers thrive within nature's limits. We enrich staple foods to improve the health of millions. And we create fine fragrances that boost concentration, creativity, and mood. It's complex stuff, but the outcome is simple. We enrich life for the many while nurturing it for all. Our two companies form a single force for good, full of life in all its glory, as innovators in nutrition, health, and beauty. Together, we bring progress to life. Together, we are DSM Firmenich.
A JBS nasceu há 70 anos no interior do Brasil, alimentando sonhos e a realização deles. E foi alimentando o sonho brasileiro de ser uma empresa global que hoje a JBS é a maior empresa do mundo em seu setor. Produz em 16 países, está nos pratos em milhares de lares pelo mundo. Mas suas raízes estão no Brasil, onde alimenta crescimento, alimenta geração de empregos para os 151 mil colaboradores, alimenta sustentabilidade para fazer cada vez mais com menos, alimenta tecnologia para tirar o máximo de cada proteína e até criar novas. Alimenta o mundo, alimenta o Brasil, alimenta você. JBS, há 70 anos, alimentando o que alimenta o mundo.
O presente nunca nos impôs tantos desafios
como os trazidos pelas mudanças climáticas
que afetam a agricultura.
E como superar os desafios?
E, ao mesmo tempo, manter a produção sustentável de alimentos em um mundo em constante crescimento?
Para a Syngenta, a resposta começa no solo, que é a base de tudo.
Nossas tecnologias e soluções contribuem diretamente para que os agricultores cuidem da terra.
Desde herbicidas que promovem práticas como o plantio direto,
até programas para recuperação de áreas degradadas,
como o Reverte, e parcerias que corroborem nossa missão de expandir a agricultura positiva.
Esse é o compromisso Syngenta.
Bom dia a todos. Meu nome é Maria Clara, eu sou gerente de comunicação institucional do CEBDS. Sejam muito bem-vindos.
Good morning, everyone. Maria Clara, welcome. I'm Roberto Belém, I'm Manager of Communication and Press with our company with CEBDS. So we're going to be conducting you to our debate. Unfortunately, Marina Silva has been called upon for an important meeting. She won't be able to be here with us. Welcome to the Sustainable Conference in 2023. This is a CEBDS meeting, and we represent the International Network for Work Business Council for Sustainable Development. This event is a partnership with Economic Valor, and CEBDS is a council that is made up of the most important business groups in Brazil, promoting sustainable growth by means of connection with the government and the civil society, propagating most recent concepts and practice in the topic. We are connecting over 110 business groups, and would like to thank the sponsors that made this possible: Petrobras, federal government, Arcadis, Bradesco, Equinor, Shell, DSM Firmenich, JBS, and Syngenta. We also thank the technical team from CEBDS that worked in this program. CEBDS 2023 had all the carbon emissions compensated for with the IPSG. We're going to talk to speakers so that we can foster the present of a more sustainable future. And Brazil is going to be one of the main players in this kind of economy. We're going to launch a series of initiatives and publications. We have TNFP that is aimed at generating positive impact in nature. OBCTI that is something that mobilizes the private sector in the fight for social inequality. We have the Reporting Matters initiative as well, qualifying corporate reports in sustainability, and a specific launch for investors in our communication and sustainability guidelines. We also have the Reimagine exercise, an invitation for us to imagine sustainable futures and everything we want out of it. We're going to develop these images. So artificial intelligence is going to create that, but based on your ideas. So you can use the QR code that is in here on the screen to send your suggestions. If need be, you can talk to our team at the back of the room. And we hope these images can be an inspiration and a reminder of how we can work together. On the back of your badge, we have the QR code so you can have an access to the complete program of the event, the publication that we just mentioned, to get to know the scenario, the stage here, in fact, that used the recycled material from other projects. We have information for restaurants, for lunch, and the event assessment form. We are not responsible for anything that people leave inside or outside the theater. Our event is being broadcasted through the Valor Econômico channels. If you want to share that in your social network so more people can follow the debate, we will thank you for that. I'd like to invite Marina Grossi, the head of CEBDS, for the initial opening remarks. So Marina, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Olá, bom dia a todos. É um prazer enorme estar aqui com vocês. Acho que a última vez que a gente teve um sustentável como esse, a gente ainda estava na pandemia, então é bem possível que agora vocês estejam em contato aí direto depois de um bom tempo. Muito bem-vindos. A gente está na nossa 11ª edição do Sustentável. E o Sustentável, eu estava falando para o Peter, que é o nosso convidado especialíssimo aqui, ele foi feito em 2005 para abrir para a população em geral, mostrar o que as empresas estão fazendo nessa agenda. E a gente viu que muita evolução aconteceu desde então. Esse é um mundo que a gente está de grandes transformações, tanto lá fora quanto aqui dentro do Brasil, de grandes transformações e incertezas, mas tem uma agenda que é inadiável, que é a agenda de sustentabilidade, que a gente está há 26 anos falando sobre ela. Essa agenda inadiável tem um momento singular aqui no Brasil, uma conjunção de forças que
as empresas que já fazem
isso por meio do CEBDS há 26 anos, por exemplo, mas agora tem um governo também cuja principal bandeira é a sustentabilidade também. Dos 37 ministérios que o governo tem, 17 deles, ou 19 deles, a Ana me corrige, tratam da questão da sustentabilidade, tratam de forma transversal, que é como deve ser tratado. Mais do que isso, a gente vai presidir o G20, tem o Banco dos BRICS, tem o Mercosul e finalmente tem em 2025 a COP em Belém. A primeira COP é de clima que vai acontecer no Brasil e no estado da Amazônia. A gente está como país o mais bem posicionado para realizar essa transformação, essa transição justa e inclusiva. Estamos muito mais bem posicionados do que o resto do mundo. A gente pode ser o primeiro país a chegar ao net zero até com as tecnologias existentes, segundo o estudo da COP. E por que a gente é tão relevante nesse contexto?
The COP has proposed. Why are we so relevant? We have comparative advantages that are huge. We have a cultural advantage. We have for 56% black people in our makeup, 42% white, 1.69 million indigenous people, and 1.32 million people that live in the Quilombos. Our electric matrix is almost 96% renewable, and for G20 they are at almost 30%. And our electric matrix, our power matrix, we are at almost 50% renewable energies. So we are the barn for the rest of the world, so to speak. We are the warehouse for food items for the rest of the world. So we became an importer for food items, and then we turned into an exporter. And Brazil represents most of the food exports all over the world, and we have a huge reforestation program. Even though we have had lots of threats in Brazil, we have had a constitution for 36 years in place, and the three powers are in place. But we have challenges. The main one, which CEBDS is basically extremely engaged with, particularly since 2014, which is the illegal logging. And we know that it's not just control measure that we need, but we need to have an alternative model for business. We have good news about that. We see that deforestation is being reduced with control and command initiatives by the government. And we see that deforestation in the Brazilian savanna has increased quite a lot. The loss of forest and the spike in carbon emissions are crises that are retrofed to each other, and we feel the impacts. Now we see the great drought in Manaus with the Rio Negro reaching its lowest level in history, and approximately 500,000 people have been impacted by this drought. 2023 is the hottest year in the history in Brazil. And it's not just Brazil. All over the world this has been felt. We have abnormal temperatures at this new level because Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, to say that we're going through a global crisis in this scenario. When you come to this theater, we can see that there are many people that live as a homeless person, and they are basically sleeping underneath this theater here. And this is part of the result of the destruction of the ecosystem. 30% of the Brazilians live below the poverty line, and 9% live in extreme poverty. In the G20, Brazil is considered the most unequal group, only below South Africa. And we have to add value to our social and environmental capital by generating green jobs and working on inclusive economy. But we have challenges for that. One of them is the legal unsafety or insecurity, in fact. We need more legal security. We need to build our taxonomy. We need to cause this legal insecurity to be reduced. And these measures can basically help in this scenario. And by 2025, this will require something at around $53 trillion. One of the ways to make this available is the carbon market, which has been something that we raised back in 2016 as one of our main flags. And this is crucial to enable resources for this transition, talking about industry and energy. So at the Senate, we passed a law along these lines, and we hope that we can promote advances in this area, because this is a very near and dear asset for CEBDS, and it's important for us to contribute at the ministries and the private sector, and we gather a lot of representatives of the private sector for this area. And those that are going to be regulated are requesting for that regulation to happen. And this is one of the main initiatives by the Green Package from Haddad, and I will talk about that pretty soon. Along these 26 years, we have been building bridges and leveraging concrete evolution. One of the examples is that for climate neutralization, we have been able to turn around what we had promoted in Brazil for this climate balance in the country with the help of the CEOs, and we are now a subscriber of the Paris Agreement for 2050, and it makes no sense for a country such as Brazil to talk about being less ambitious with the NDC that we have, with the commitment that we have for the Paris Agreement. This journey of helping companies, this is something that CEBDS always does on an everyday basis. With the Business Council, we launched our own platform, but this is the Net Zero platform. We launched this at the last COP in Egypt, and this is kind of integrated, and we have the climate drive, which is basically in our scenario. Our concern has always been with this kind of a tool for that what we have in Brazil talks to the rest of the world. There's no point in creating a local solution only if this solution is not understood all over the world. Last year, in 2015, in the biodiversity, we launched our Action for Nature platform. More recently, we have been helping substantially in the ecological transformation plan by Minister Haddad with 6 pillars. In record time, we have taken our CEOs to have a first conversation, and Minister Haddad was quite open to that. And 18 days later, in a very hard work by the teams in the companies, we have delivered subsidies for all of the 6 pillars in the green plan by Minister Haddad. And this is something that touches all the other ministries. We are helping in the biodiversity goals at the local level by means of the strategy and the local plan for biodiversity. Last but not least, let me just drink a little bit of water here, if you allow me. So last but not least, the Amazon has been one of our main concerns since 2014. We started by positioning the business, positioning by the private sector with investors, the private sector and companies. So we talked to all the powers to have control on this area. And our companies had the power because we operate in the Amazon, and over 50% of our companies operate in the Amazon area. And they said that it is possible to do business, preserve, and produce. In 2021, this started out a business movement for Amazon with the goal of mobilizing the companies, but inserting that biome in the business strategies. The Amazon is a guardian for solutions for the climate crisis and the loss for biodiversity. It can catalyze all of the problems in the Brazilian economy, generating 212,000 jobs and attracting a lot of foreign investment. And making this forest scenario solution is something that we are extremely mobilized about in the Amazon area. Well, at least for 4 segments: bioeconomy, agriculture, cattle farming, and other areas. This is something really important for us. So I'm going to be moving over to the end because my time is almost over. And I'm going to talk about our journey from Dubai to Belém. And when we talked to Peter Barker in the last meeting, we were trying to organize how we can be together at the domestic level and the global level to warm up this journey in such near and dear topics like, climatic changes and nature-based solutions to build this legacy forward. And this is an agenda that has not been at the COP for several years. Brazil can have a key role to avoid stagnation of the climate agenda. We can lead by example. The private sector has 112 companies representing 50% of the GDP. So we can build a common project with soft power in our commitment, but we have to have an action plan in place, and that requires an effort by all. And we are here to talk about how we can move forward as a society and as the government. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marina. Now I'd like to call upon Mr. Peter Barker, the President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development.
Good morning. I'm going to speak English, so if you need translation, please put on your devices. And it was such a pleasure to listen to Marina. Anyone who's ever worked with her directly, you can only love her. So thanks for the great speech. Thanks for the overview. And thanks for your leadership, because do not underestimate the power that CEBDS has in the global conversation. You cannot go to a COP anywhere in the world, or Marina and her team will be there representing the voice of Brazil and Brazilian business. So well done. So I'm with the World Business Council. 230 of the largest companies in the world working on exactly the same agenda as CEBDS does here in Brazil. Very close working relationship, and I should say this at the end of my talk, but from Dubai to Belém, we will be working together. And that is an absolute amazing opportunity for all of us. Just like Marina said, in WBCSD, we see 3 global challenges. One is the climate emergency. We don't talk about climate change anymore. This is about climate emergency. The second is the loss of nature. And the third one is mounting inequality. Marina gave examples of here in Brazil. But inequality is now a very wide-spreading disease in our economic systems, leading to polarization in politics and making the world for business rather unpredictable. And so if you look at these 3 crises, climate, nature, inequality, then the answer to that is no longer incremental change. Many of us, many of you will be in business, and we have all become successful by incrementally changing and improving our businesses. Getting productivity up, getting pricing power up, your profit would go up and business would be fine. That's no longer the era we're in. We are now in the era of system transformation, of economy-wide change that we need to move. So when I saw the motto of this meeting, the leaders of the new economy, I thought that's the place to be. And it happens to be that Brazil is the place to be. Thank you. If we think about system transformation, we see 2 big axes of change. One is the axe of innovation, of new technologies, new business models, new products coming to market. And the other one is the change of economic incentives. We cannot deal with all these sustainability challenges on an IRR basis, on a discounted cash flow basis. We need new metrics to measure whether we are making success. The great news for anyone in business, and I think you're experiencing it here in Brazil as well, is that the world is now turning to business for the solutions. It's no longer against business because business has negative impacts. It's now really looking at what is the innovation power that business can bring, what are the solutions that we can invest in, and how do we scale those up? And that is really beginning to work, and I'm pretty sure when we all go to Dubai in a few weeks for COP28, we'll see expressions of that. I would anticipate out of Dubai coming ambitious targets for scope 1 and 2 reductions in oil and gas, tripling renewable energy by 2030 globally, doubling green hydrogen by 2030 globally. Do is not just change its own operations, important as it is, but we must think how do we change the value chains from raw material to end of product. And that means we need data, we need science, and we need collaboration with many partners that we work and form these value chains with. Then when it comes to these economic incentives, the thing that will happen in a few weeks in Dubai is the launch in a very big way of the corporate performance and accountability system for carbon. I don't have time this morning to go in great detail on that, but what it basically means, business needs to learn to manage carbon the same way that they manage money. So what that means, the company sets a science-based target. It creates a transition plan towards net zero, i.e. a strategy plan. It needs to measure the emissions that it has, and then it needs to report or disclose these emissions to the outside world using a global comparable framework like the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. If we get that right, and there's lots of work to be done around scope 3 emissions, avoided emissions, but if we get that performance system right, then you will see 2 things. Business will drive innovation, business will be willing to be held accountable for the progress, and these 2 things combined will generate a trust in business as a positive actor in the world, and secondly, will drive the transformation that the world needs. So that's the global view. Innovation is the word going forward. Accountability and performance management will be the way to drive that forward. Now let me spend a few moments on talking Brazil and wider Latin America. In many, many years, and particularly in some of the quickly changing electoral pictures in countries like here, Brazil hasn't been on the forefront of the global debate. That, I hope, will now change. With COP30 coming to Belém, with the G20 being here next year, Brazil will form the global stage on which we will all meet to talk about the transformation the world needs. And if I think about Brazil and the innovations that it needs and can drive to realize these system transformations, it will all be about regenerative agriculture. How can we make biofuels really part of the mix of renewable energy? What can we do to drive and scale the bioeconomy in the world? What can we do here to really drive and be the example for green industrialization? Those are areas, combined with the voluntary carbon market that will be coming here, that really makes these words on the screen, not just words on a screen, but an ambition that we should all have. Make Brazil the leader of the new economy, make Brazilian and Latin American business leaders the leaders who will come to COP30 in 2 years from now with the innovations that the world needs. And that is why I'm here, and that's why I'll be here many times between now and COP30 to drive you, to inspire you, to cheer you on, because we need Brazil and Brazilian businesses to lead the transformation. Thank you very much.
Obrigada, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Nesse momento eu quero convidar ao palco Ana Toni, secretária de Mudanças Climáticas do Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudanças Climáticas.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I can imagine your being upset, not only for Marina Silva, but I'd like to apologize. But as it was mentioned, the minister, Marina Silva, she was summoned for an emergency meeting, so unfortunately she couldn't join us. I am trying to represent her, understanding the responsibility that this poses. First, I'd like to thank Marina Grossi and the Brazilian Business Council for the invitation. It is a great pleasure being here, understanding that this is 11th edition of the Sustainable Congress, showing the resilience by the Brazilian Business Council and its leadership in terms of working with the sustainability topic, and we've been concerned about it for a long time. The topic for this Congress couldn't have been chosen better when we talk about sustainability. As it was mentioned now, I am a Secretary of Climate in the Ministry of Environment, not only representing Minister Marina Silva, but also showing what the Brazilian government is doing. Government Lula is coming now in his third administration, prioritizing sustainability. This is probably the greatest mark of the Lula administration in its third edition. Sustainability and its three major pillars: economic, social, and obviously environmental. Perhaps, no, actually, differently from what we've seen in the past, this mark of sustainability, it's not just a spoken mark, but it's an actionable mark. And I'd say that this is a very unique moment, almost as a perfect storm. As was mentioned, not only do we have a government that is completely committed to doing sustainability rather than just talking about it, but this is also a unique moment for Brazil. Brazil will be, in 2022, in 2022 we started leading different roles, including the G20, and also we are the president for Mercosur. It's not a coincidence that Mercosur and the European Union are trying to reach an agreement. Next year, being in the chair of G20, plus we're going to be with BRICS and BRICS Plus. And we're going to have our grand finale, which is going to be COP30 in 2025. We have then the opportunity to nationally work on that, and as we do it nationally, we can also take the leadership and lead by example, as Minister Marina mentioned, so that we can show the world and bring the world in this doing of the sustainability. When I talk about doing sustainability, everyone asks, what are you doing as a government or with the government? And that's a little bit of the accountability I want to share about what the government is doing. I'd like to remind you that when we speak of the environment, we received many ministries from the government with lots of problems that everyone know about in terms of the deterioration of those ministries and departments. But now, in those 11 months, we have 49% of deforestation having decreased in comparison to last year. And also millions of tons of carbon that have not been put out to the atmosphere. We have always recently brought a new consultation, public consultation for specific projects. We also have this fund that is managed by the BNDES. Not only as it was done before, but now we have 10 billion, 0.4 of reais to finance projects in the area of sustainability. The Amazon Fund also is back, and now not only supporting projects in the Amazon, but also with the municipality to foment an economy that, because we know that only command and control is not enough to control the deforestation issue. In a very short period, considering government administrations, we were able to reach this context of the carbon market, working with Senate, Leila, to at least in Senate have the approbation, and also the carbon market was mentioned there. We're also currently working in the wind power, offshore wind power energy, which we know it's so important for Brazil. The Safra plan has already taken its first steps to connect the Safra plan to the ABC plan, showing that at the end, we want the whole agriculture area to be the agriculture that we want for Brazil, a low-carbon agriculture. The fuel of the future was relaunched. Multiple activities that show the doing in practical terms, that the federal government is trying to show that the sustainability is not theory, but rather the practicality that will make legitimate our international leadership. But all those activities, they compose something that is bigger and has been mentioned, which is the ecological transition plan. It is a dynamic plan. It's not just a plan with 6 steps, 6 different stages, but rather a plan that shows where Brazil wants to position itself. Brazil as a social environment power, as a sustainability power. This is what the government sees, building together with the private sector, civil societies, and academia. And then the mitigation plans that have already been decided in the inter-ministry committees, 8 mitigation plans and 14 adaptation plans. We expect to design those plans. We have already started them, almost as business plans. We want to conclude each of them understanding how much mitigating will cost in terms of transportation, energy, industry, where the resources will come from, what kind of legal framework do we need for those plans to be not only government plans, but also plans that the private sector can build together with us and that we are able to support also the implementation eventually. But we understand that not only Brazil, but also on a world level, we are at the crossroads to head to a more sustainable world, not repeating the same mistakes from the past. We already have all the evidence. We already have all the reports. The IPCC report, or the reports by IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also the Energy Agency, International Agency. I think we already have the evidence. We know the choices we need to make. And at the same time, we are seeing the consequence of non-action. What we see in the Amazon now, or in the state of Santa Catarina, or what happened in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, or here in the north coast of the state of São Paulo, that shows also the price of non-action. And will be the same for the private sector, that will be paying for the price of non-action. And obviously, everything that needs to be considered. Obviously, we don't have the same resources of the developed nations, so the ecological transition plan is almost an inspiration from the new Green Deal from Europe or the American plan, but with way less resources, as we know. Therefore, in Brazil, for those plans to take off, we will still need the partnership with the private sector. This partnership will be ever more important so that those plans can become a reality in the sense of building together. I think this is of the essence for us to be here joining this Brazilian Business Council meeting, because a sustainable partnership will only happen if there's a partnership between federal government, national governments, and obviously the private sector. I was reading an article the other day that mentioned that the time is always proper to do the right thing. That was a Martin Luther King quote. And the right moment to do the right thing is now. The country cannot just continue waiting more and more with the climate issues we're having, but above all, Brazil cannot allow itself to do the thing, not do what needs to be done now. We have lost opportunities of becoming the country of the future. So as we become the country of the present, and now with this alignment between federal government, civil societies, private sector, national governments, having all the legal security that were very well placed, we'll be able to implement this Brazil, which is a sustainable power. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Ana. We are now showing a video, a welcome video from the Petrobras President, Jean-Paul Prates. Welcome everyone present in the Sustainable Cragos 2023 promoted by the Brazilian Business Council, Sustainable Congress, and they are a reference in this area in the whole country. I really would like to be joining you in this 11th edition of the event, but as everyone knows today, we are here in Brasilia today with our other directors celebrating our 70 years of Petrobras. Although I'm not able to join in person, I really wanted to record this video to thank the invitation and reinforce that Petrobras considers this discussion very important in terms of Brazilians' engagement in the global discussion and sustainability and also fair energy transition. Also considering the presence of Brazil or Brazil in G20 and also COP30 in Belém, those will be opportunities to even strengthen the Brazilian contribution in this topic. Petrobras is really engaged in this discussion and will be very well represented by our executives. The sustainable development has the commitment to has a daily commitment by Petrobras. One of its main premises is the energy transition, which at the same time fight climate change and doesn't encourage the poverty by the energy sector. And as we say here, we're not going to leave no man behind. We're going to lead a fair energy transition in Latin America. I wish all of you a great event, and once again, I'd like to thank President Chairman Marina Grossi. Also, I want to express our gratitude to the World Business Council, and I also would like to thank everyone who's present here. And now, I pass the floor via Viviane Coelho, our Executive President. I'd like to invite Viviane Coelho to join us on stage and share a few things with us. She's the head of climate change and decarbonization for Petrobras. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure being here. Thank you, CEBDS, for the organization of the 11th edition of the event. I'd like to make some quick comments. Sustainability has always been a competitiveness issue, and at Petrobras, understanding all the things that are being taken care, being dealt with through different nations, this will always be a competitiveness factor, including affecting international commerce. Energy is a central element when we talk about energy transition. When we talk about decarbonization and fighting the climate emergencies, because we understand that it represents 80% of world emissions, and there's a characteristic that influences the well-being, productivity, and competitiveness in the chain. It affects the economy in its base. It affects the economy both in cost and productivity. Countries with energy poverty has less manpower because people are less available to be productive. It is in energy that we have some of the most win-win opportunities for any society. It is through energy that we can identify simple opportunities for decarbonization, for example, through efficiency, the efficiency of infrastructure, of the users of energy with great diagonal benefits in terms also of competitiveness and quality of life, especially in urban centers. It is also in energy that we have certain sectors that are the most difficult to decarbonize. It's also in energy we have sectors that may cost hundreds of dollars to reduce carbon emissions, and therefore are the sectors that, when we optimize climate modeling, and climate modeling, it is ideally we should reduce as fast as possible, and also as we tackle what is at hand first. Say we have $300 to allocate in energy transition, we're able to do more, applying the resources at what costs less for each ton of carbon. So energy, it is a core issue. And Brazil is a huge case of success in energy. We have the second lowest unit emission in G20. It's almost 4 times less, especially if produced in Brazil in terms of carbon energy. We're going to be 3 to 4 times less compared to what is produced in the average of OECD. We have an electric energy matrix that is so efficient that it is what is expected for the world level by 2050 in the 1.5 scenario. But there's still lots to do. We have 10 more biofuel than the world average, but we still have more to be done. We have a country in development, a necessity to expand in a clean and competitive and fair way, and also have lots of energy efficient, especially our electric matrix is really advanced, but our consumption is quite inefficient in a country. And this matrix that is advanced, it is through comparative advantages. Of course, we have great potential for renewables. We have access to almost all types of energy, but also it is a target of public policies that allowed us to get here. There are incentives for us to get here and for us to have the energy matrix that we have today. I'd like to reinforce Petrobras, which celebrated 80 years now in October, is really attentive to comply with ethical and competitiveness concepts that is very important to us. I want to make it clear that we understand that the world market needs that transition by 2050, and especially by 2030.
We do not work with the hypothesis that there is an endless oil market within Petrobras, and that's why we believe that oil is only going to be legitimate, that it's not going to disappear, that it's going to be associated to non-energy niche markets and for niches that are going to be hard to abate in the future, and it's only going to be legitimate for oil production for those who are extremely efficient. That's why we have reduced 40% of our operational emissions, and we have doubled our efficiency in our oil fields and rigs, and we operate some of the most efficient oil fields in the world. Each staff members at Petrobras has carbon emissions linked to their variable remuneration, and we have a growing innovation target, and we have a very huge and relevant innovation capacity, which is a catalyst for innovation in the country. We had a meaningful goal in efficiency in our refineries, and we have a budget and target for decarbonization that is at around $600 million for a period of 5 years. And this is something that would not have been conducted had this budget not existed. Of course, knowing that oil is going to be reduced, we know that some markets will need to increase, and that is the sustainable market for sustainable fuels and for electrical power. For oil to be phased out, the proportion of this renewable energy growth has to be very high. So that's why Petrobras has announced our intention in expanding our low carbon chain participation involving sustainable fuels and the renewable electric energy. And as I said, just to wrap this up, of course in Brazil, unlike the rest of the world, energy is responsible for 23% of emissions. Naturally, because of this important profile of renewables in the Brazilian energy, and because of Brazil when it comes to emissions coming from the use of the land. And Petrobras has a very important operation when it comes to biodiversity, forests, and deforestation. We have the largest beach monitoring program all over the world with 140 million reais invested in 2022, thus supporting seashore biodiversity. We have our first credit for carbon emission in 2023 that was issued in a program as a way to support the maintenance of the forest and the restoration of Brazilian ecosystems. The Petrobras Social-Ambiental Environment and Program has been investing in several licensing programs, and our licensing program has been made with 3 billion reais when it comes to the conservation units that have been issued for the licensing. And Petrobras is one of the funders for the Amazon Fund. And we understand that the Petrobras presence is relevant, and it enables Brazil to have its own space in the international oil market, and we hope that we can produce oil that is at a lower level of emission, bringing money to Brazil. Each oil barrel produced in Brazil is equivalent to 4,000 tons in royalties and carbon emission decarbonization program. So we hope that we can collaborate by producing oil that is the one that is required in this transition world, investing in new energies and contributing to the challenge in bioeconomy and the reduction of deforestation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Viviana. Now we're going to start the first panel, which is going to be focused on Brazil, the player in the new economy. I invite Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, Secretary for Climate, Energy and Environment at the Brazilian government. I also invite Gilberto Tomazoni, Global CEO of JBS. I'd like to call upon Veronica Coelho, CEO of Econômico Brazil. Also Marina Grossi, who's going to be moderating the debate. And I'd like to call upon our special envoy for climate in the United States, John Forbes Kerry. Marina, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much. Hello. Hi, can you hear me? All right, thank you, Pelin, thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with Veronica, Tomazoni, André, and Mr. Kerry. We have been talking about this ever since Brazil has been nominated for the Belém COP and other activities. And this is a debate that maybe we could dive into more detail, and I'd like to start off with you, André, because there is that idea in Brazil. I'm sorry, what was that? No, I'm going to start off with you. Sorry for that. But as an ambassador, you have heard that, this is Brazil's turn. Brazil is the country of the future. And this is something that we have been hearing for quite a while now. Anatoly said that, and I said it myself. Now there is these factors in place with the government, with the private initiative, and CEBDS talking about this for 26 years now and causing this agenda to evolve in the country. But now we have the perfect storm, so to speak, so we can move forward on that. So is it Brazil's turn, really, André? How do you perceive that? Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Marina, this question is quite specific, and I'm going to try not to take too long in my answering. But I think that, one thing that we have to consider is that Brazil has already done extraordinary things. Brazil is an extraordinary country in its own right, and this idea of the country of the future is that, we're able to do a lot more. It's not like we've lost all of the opportunities. I think that we've had extraordinary advancements and we have a wonderful society. So, which developing country has the industrial scenario that we have, the institutions, the governance, civil society, science, academia? So Brazil has delivered quite a lot. But it's true that we have an even more extraordinary future. And I think that this is a very important moment for Brazil. And this has been designed in such a way that Brazil is able to position itself in a very favorable manner. I'm extremely confident and very well impressed, and I think that Ana said it clearly. It's important to have a government where the Ministry of Treasury does a plan for ecological transformation, where we can add a logic of sustainable development for the whole world. And this is something that very few countries in the world have done. And we have all of our tradition in foreign negotiation. I think that everything has been kind of staged so that this moment could come and that we could make the best of it. Thank you, Andre. Now I have a question to Mr. John Kerry, the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate in the United States. I'm going to ask it in Portuguese, but we have interpretation going on in there, right? Okay, in the view of the United States, what is the position that Brazil can and shall develop in the global scenario for the climate agenda? And what is missing for Brazil to really fill in that space? The floor is all yours, and Kerry. So Gilberto Tomazoni, JBS CEO. So Tomazoni, I think that we may have been talking about agriculture in Brazil, and I think that, we may have that in our opening remarks. And the biggest challenge is in supply chain, where we have most of the emissions available. How can one of the largest producers of food items in the world prepare itself for this global leadership? How are you preparing for Scope 3? Because Scope 3 is the main challenge. So what are the measures that you're putting in place for that? Well, Marina, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And talking about this issue is important for us.
Estão vendo? Ok. Então, obrigado pela oportunidade. Eu acho que essa discussão.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think that, this climate change is really important, or climate emergency is really important. And I would add that the food insecurity scenario is also something that needs to be addressed. And as JBS said, we are in 20 countries in 5 continents. And our core is biogenic by nature. And we have been working with hundreds and thousands of rural producers that grow food items by working in hundreds of millions of hectares. That's why sustainability is at the core of our strategy, and we have decided to be net zero by 2040. First thing we did is we have been mapping out all of our emissions, so it's over 500 sites all over the world, and 30 different types of business and all kinds of protein sources, and this is going to be a roadmap for each type of protein for each business unit, and this is going to be ready by early next year. But we're taking very quick actions for scopes 1 and 2, so we're moving quite quickly in there. We have invested over $130 million with 180 projects, and there are several projects that go from changing the energy matrix. But one of the important things that we're doing is, using our industrial waste as raw material to add value. And we have, for example, established a fertilizer industry, a biofuel industry, a collagen or peptide and gelatin business. We are producing energy and how to use biomass, and now aviation fuel. If any of you is flying from Sacramento in the United States to Los Angeles with United, you're going to be flying with our special fuel. And Scope 3 is the great producer of emissions with over 98.5%. So one can imagine how different it is for working with such a large number of producers, and we have a huge pyramid with a different strategy for every tier in the pyramid. For large producers, we work with them to have this integration of crops with cattle farming and forests, so we can have a better production, reducing emission, and cutting deforestation to zero. And we have a farming assurance campaign that we call Fazenda Nota 10 in Brazil, so that we work with producers to increase productivity and use a crop rotation or generative crop system, so we can produce more with less errors. And then we get to small farmers. We're investing in offices, and we have positioned 19 to 20 green offices all over Brazil to provide assistance to these producers, so we can have that kind of a support on their transition. Because I feel that nowadays we are kind of sitting in the middle of the chain, and I think that this is a privilege that we can cause a lot of influence in the long chain, because we bring transformation to the way we produce things. So from these offices we take technical support and we help farmers do that transition. Anyone that has a problem with compliance with the legislation, these folks are compliant, and we work with thousands of farmers with thousands of hectares of area that have been recovered, and we have over 2 million cattle that were illegal in the system, and now they are all legalized. Then we have micro farmers, because we talked about social inequality, and we have the Amazon Fund that is going to take work to these micro producers. We have 1,600 farmers, families, and now by the end of the project we're going to have like 7,000 or 8,000 families of farmers, and now they are going to be eligible to carbon credits. And tomorrow we're going to launch a revolutionary program with the Amazon Business Fund, which is going to enable us to take very high technology to these micro farmers to track all of the value chain. But the challenges we have in this chain are huge, and we're working not just on the topics that we are discussing here, just so we're not talking about theory, but we're working in coalitions. We believe that no one is going to solve this on their own. We're going to have to do things together, and now we're working with the government in Pará, and we have the Brazilian Association of Producers and Growers of beef and so on, and the civil society like the Nature Conservancy is part of this association, and we try to take technical support, lend the most visibility in this chain, and to make the use of land more of a regular and new area of improvement. So we have invested in technology, and we have developed the egg farms of the future in England. So we use geological energy, so we drill holes of 140 meters deep, and we use that for generating electricity, so that it's a sustainable energy source. And we have been investing in developments with the University of Nebraska. So we are building the Innovation Center for Feedlot in the United States, and we have been using all of this technology to reduce the endothermic fermentation, so we can scale this kind of technology, because they are emerging and they need scale. So we have been doing a very holistic approach in all of the areas of focus in our area. Well, Tomazoni, as you said, this is the biggest challenge, not only in here, but all over the world. But the CEBDS Net Zero platform has the climate drive as one of its tools, which is basically all about Scope 3. That's a great challenge.
Of coming in virtually, but it's terrific to be with all of you. It's a great audience, and I know that Ambassador Dulago knows very well how much the United States is pleased to be able to be working with an administration in Brazil that is serious and really wants to move forward. We're proud to be a strategic partner on the subject of the climate crisis. I've been working with Marina Silva and with others in your government. I'm sorry she had to go to a meeting, but I understand that challenge always for all of us. Look, our countries have an enormous amount in common, and we have not always succeeded in maximizing the opportunities for various reasons, which we don't need to go into, because we're both sitting here now staring at an imperative for action, as well as a remarkable opportunity for collaboration between us. Our two countries have an enormous amount in common. We are obviously the two largest democracies in the Western Hemisphere. We're also the two largest economies. And the United States is pleased that we are the largest source of foreign direct investment in Brazil. We're also both agricultural and energy powerhouses and mega forest countries. You obviously having the prime forest of the planet. We are also the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the Western Hemisphere. And the United States obviously is number one in that score, though we are now going down thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act and President Biden's leadership, who has made this an all-of-government priority. So it's only natural that Brazil would play a key role in addressing the climate crisis on the international stage. And obviously, it is expected to be hosting COP30 in Belém. Let me tell you, as somebody who started this journey in 1988 when I was a senator, and Jim Hansen of the NASA testified to us in the Congress that climate change was happening. Since then, I've been to many meetings, including the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, and many COPs thereafter. And it's a little bit jarring to me to be talking or even mentioning COP30 when we have yet to get COP28 under our belt. And I think all of us are asking the question, so how many COPs are there going to be? How many COPs is Mother Nature going to give us still before we have passed planetary boundaries that we can't come back from? And I just want to take one moment to stress to everybody the extreme urgency of being serious about this and taking enormous steps forward. I congratulate Equinor. I wish every oil and gas company in the world was doing all the things that Equinor is doing and is committed to sustainability and to being leaders in this transition from just an oil and gas company to a full-fledged energy production company, a modern energy production company. And I think it's obvious that Brazil has a huge stake in the success of COP28 coming up in Dubai and COP29, because whatever successes come out of those two COPs are going to land in the lap of Brazil in the context of 2030. So Brazil has a big interest in making sure that this COP brings people to the fold and that we move forward. Now, I know that with events in Ukraine and the events in the Middle East right now, unfolding even as we're talking right now, it may be hard for some people to fully wrap their arms around climate, which yet still, unfortunately, remains somehow elusive for some governments. and willfully avoided by some governments and by certain corporations in the world. And that is tragic for all of us, because this takes every country, all of us doing everything possible. It's an all-hands-on-deck moment. And while the crises of Ukraine and the Middle East are unfolding, even as we're speaking here, with people dying and with the potential of great conflict, the fact remains that climate is taking lives all around the world on a daily basis. There are 7 million people dying every year just from the bad quality of air that comes from the greenhouse gas pollution, which is the cause of this crisis. I just want to take one moment to emphasize that. This does not require some, excuse me, some new level of political sagacity. It doesn't take some breaking of a new code or a new equation, a new algorithm. We know what's going on, and it's very straightforward. It's what we human beings are choosing to do every day as a form of transportation, of propulsion, of heat for our homes, lighting of our factories, of the way we produce power. This is from the burning of fossil fuel where we do not capture the emissions sufficiently. Now, some companies are working very hard on direct air carbon capture, and we have empowered companies through the Inflation Reduction Act. We have empowered companies to be in the position of using tax credits to be able to go forward with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. But we still have an enormous road to journey to be able to get to a point where we can say we're capturing the emissions. And that is why the scientists of the world have said to us, you must reduce your emissions by at least 43% by 2030 and by net zero by 2050. And we have yet to get many entities in the world to commit that that is in fact exactly what they're going to do. A prior speaker from Equinor mentioned the scope 1 and 2. We need to get every oil and gas company in the world committed to do scope 1 and 2 by 2030. We need to get them to commit that they're going to do all methane reduction by 2030, that we're going to increase our CapEx, the capital expenditures, on clean energy for the future, and that we're all going to come to the table with real plans to be able to achieve net zero by 2050. And the role that Brazil can play in this is absolutely critical. As an emerging economy, as a country with the great challenge of poverty, as a country with the massive Amazon, a country whose efforts on deforestation this year are inspiring, because your deforestation is falling by nearly half, and you've seen the global response in terms of the form of increased financing and investments. So if Brazil can continue to demonstrate the progress that it has and expand it to other biomes like the Cerrado or others, it can serve as a model for other countries. And Brazilian officials have been clear that these initial impressive gains are going to have to be followed up by long-term initiatives that provide the millions of residents of the Amazon. I often hear different figures, 25 million, 28 million, 30 million, but it's a lot of millions. It's a lot of people with real problems on a daily basis. And you have to come in and work on sustainable livelihoods in which forest protections go hand in hand with economic development. Now, one of the things we've learned in these last years is that you can actually farm much less land and produce even more product. And that is true also of cattle. So we're not in a situation where we have to say to people, oh, you have to give it up or you have to sacrifice. No, you could have a higher standard of living and still live sustainably. So Brazilian agribusiness has an opportunity to serve as an example of how high productivity can be combined with low emission practices without converting natural ecosystems. Now, I know that CEBDS has been very active in thinking about the models here, and Brazil has long showcased energy systems that can drive economic growth. So that's another place that you can make an enormous contribution to where we're heading. One last thing I'll just leave with you is that the fact is that we know that we can reduce these emissions. We know we have a better future on the other side of this transition. It will be cleaner. We will not lose 7 million people a year or give people cancer because of the coal-fired particulates that fall into the ocean, raise the acidity of the ocean, raise the temperature of the ocean, produce the increase of all these storms that we're living through around the world. We need to stop spending billions of dollars to clean up after a storm, rather than spending that money ahead of time to be able to avoid it and to be able to control forces that are way beyond our power. And that's what's frightening. And the Potsdam Institute, Johann Rockström, the leading scientist and director, have made it clear that we may be at 5 tipping points right now. The tipping point of coral reefs in the ocean, from which you can't recover. The tipping point of permafrost thawing around the planet, which releases pent-up methane, which is 20 to 100 times more damaging than CO2. And that's happening around the planet now because of the thawing of the permafrost. The Barents Sea ice, which has disappeared and disappearing. And finally, the 2 biggest of all, the Arctic and the Antarctic. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit on different occasions in the Antarctic last summer. And we are seeing that the heating of the poles, particularly the Arctic, is taking place 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. So my friends, this meeting and meetings like it could not be more important. And getting governments to work hand in hand with the private sector could not be more important. And having a country like Brazil, a major economic powerhouse, but still a growing, emerging economy with great human challenges. You have a voice at the table which really is one of the most important voices on the planet. So I thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I really look forward to our working together to get this right.
Thank you very much. Verônica, eu acho que ele levantou a bola para você.
Verônica, I think he raised the issue to you with Equinor. So could you speak a little of how a company that was originally oil and gas now sees an integrated energy system? And now you have in your website that you have the most balanced and sustainable ecosystem. And this is a long-term vision. How do you get there and what are your plans? Good morning. Can you hear me well? Marina, thank you for the invitation. I would say it's an honor being able to represent the 22,000 colleagues that we have at Equinor in the multiple events that we participate. I have to admit, today I'm even the more honored and proud to being able to speak after Equinor was mentioned here. That makes us proud and also brings a lot more responsibility on what we do and continue to do. For those who don't know Equinor, we are an energy company based in Norway. And to give you a little bit more of context, since the conflict started between Ukraine and Russia, we've heard lots of the gas supply in Europe. When Russia stopped the supply to Europe, Equinor showed why they are the We are today the biggest gas supply in Europe, but this is only a portion of what we do. We are present in more than 30 countries, producing energy from multiple sources. And Brazil is a great example of how we've been leading this journey from an oil and gas only to an energy company. We started here in Brazil in 2001, and 10 years later, we start producing in the Pilgrim, basically oil in Bacia de Campos. But today, 22 years later, from when we started our journey in Brazil, we have a very relevant portfolio in Brazil for oil and gas, a platform of renewable projects, a trade in energy, and also a partnership with Petrobras to evaluate offshore wind power projects when regulation is in place. Our purpose is to transform resources and energy to people, and from that purpose, we've been trying to be a relevant player, one of the leaders in this transition, this energy transition process. Our objective is to be a company with net zero emissions by 2050. This is properly registered in our energy transition project. As was mentioned here, every company has theirs, and we have ours, and we've had for quite a while. And very concrete, measuring our progress, our compensation for our executives are connected to hitting those targets. And we measure our performance both as a company, as professionals, but also heading towards those goals. We work today in multiple energy fronts to provide clean energy because the world needs energy today, tomorrow, the day after as well. And we need fair energy that is accessible to everyone because everyone has the right to access to energy. There is no food safety without energy safety. It's as simple as that. Recently, governments, companies, civil society have brought this thing about the energy triangle: security, access, sustainability. Econômico believes not only the importance of finding a solution for this trilemma, but also understand that we are and need to be protagonists in this challenge to find this balanced transition. And I think this is a key word: balance. This balance reflects on our name, Equinor, that comes from equilibrium, equity, but also our strategy that is 3 pillars. The first one being the continuous optimization of development and production of oil and gas, the project development and production of oil and gas, where we commit to do it as efficiently as possible from the perspective of carbon emission and reducing our emission in our operations by 50% by 2030. So we're really close to it. It is an ambitious target and we work daily towards it with multiple solutions, regardless of the country where we're present. In Norway, investing, including in field electrification, setting up offshore wind power projects exclusively to supplying energy for oil platforms so that we can have our production as efficiently as possible. That already exists. We have our High Wind Top project, which is solely directed to the supply of energy for our oil and gas installations. But also in Brazil, we've been investing for quite some time now in our operations so we can be as effective as we can be. We're competing against ourselves because today our average of emission for each oil barrel produced is half as what it is in a world level. So the carbon produced, the carbon emitted for our production for oil is half of what it is out the world. So regardless of where we are, where our projects are, we take into consideration that we need to be competitive not only in cost, but also in carbon emission. The second pillar of our strategy is associated to generating value with renewable energy, because we understand that oil and gas with low emissions and minimum, which is what we strive for, are necessary, but are not enough. We need renewable energy in greater quantities than what we have today. The estimate is that perhaps 44 trillion by 2030. Well, those numbers vary, but we're always talking about dozens of trillions of dollars that need to be invested. And a good portion of that amount needs to be invested so that we can transform technologies that are already existing but need to gain a global scale. For example, when we talk about the capacity for renewable energy, we need to leap from the current 3 gigawatts to 10 gigawatts by 2030. So this is what we need.
We're committed to causing that 50% of our gross investment by 2030 are invested in renewable energy or low carbon solutions. And we have been doing that with offshore wind farms in Europe, in the United States, in Brazil. We have been working with onshore projects. Recently, we have acquired a 2 gigawatt platform for projects to be developed, and we keep investing in trying to achieve our goal of having 12 to 16 gigawatts for energy generation by 2030. The third pillar in our strategy has to do with development of low carbon solutions. Our target is to provide the world with solutions that are able to decarbonize not just our own production, but that of other companies and industries. With technologies such as CCS, which is basically for carbon capture and storage. Our global strategy all over the world is equivalent to 10 million cars, and increasing that capacity means that we have to make this technology available to several geographical areas and industries. We believe that this is one of the technologies that can make the difference as urgently as possible in this transition process in the time we need. But others will require time so we can gain scale and make this economically sustainable. And this cooperation that we have heard from the government and the civil society and institutions in the private sector is crucial. And it's important for us to think about incentive policies and policies that can unlock regulation agendas, and we can stimulate renewable energy and carbon capture and storage to have better distribution of gas, of energy, of carbon itself, so that we can bring that to the energy area, so that these can foster the private investment to have more dynamic in this scenario, and we can share and lower costs in making this more accessible. Well, you talked about cooperation in Amazônia as well, and I think that we're way over our allotted time. That's why this gentleman is just beside me here now. But I wanted to hear from you, and I wanted to start with Andre. When we talk about collaboration, it's difficult to talk about collaboration in this context, but we're living in a country that is not submitted to any war except that the inequality war, which is pretty huge. But I wanted to let you talk about this. What is the main challenge you see for this to become a reality? If there was a snapshot, maybe Brazil would be in a much better scenario in comparison to other countries, as Tony said. But we have a lot less room for error because of that. So what are the challenges we have till the Belém copy by doing that kind of an example? Well, I think our main challenge, looking at this in an optimistic manner, I think this is an internal challenge we have. I think that we have a lot of companies here, with all of the description. And I think that this is quite symbolic that we see two sectors in here that have such an important role in the economy. And we're always reminded about the emissions challenge, and the government has been clearly fighting the source of the problem in Brazil, which is deforestation. Brazil has a completely different profile in comparison to large companies, as Petrobras said here. We have quite a different profile, but what do we see in here? We see that this agenda in Brazil is an absolute reality. One cannot deny that this is a very important agenda in our country, and the Brazilian civil society is extremely aware of that, and we are demanding answers in this area. And I believe that internal debate is extremely important. This is the main challenge for us to have the answers and to have a certain internal union, so to speak, around this problem. I believe that Brazil's position, and we've heard that from John Kerry, how much of an expectation there is about Brazil, because in theory, we have all of the conditions to be leaders in this area, but you don't proclaim yourself a leader. Other calls us leaders because we do have all of the positive elements and components for us to play a role in this international debate because it is polarizing the world in a meaningful way. First, the climate change negotiations. They are moving along quite well. And this splits opinions in developed and developing countries. And I believe that negotiations are quite frustrating for the public in general because it seems like things are not moving forward, or at least not moving forward at a pace that is compatible with the sense of urgency that John Kerry mentioned in here. This is the main watershed component in comparison to 10 years ago. And the sense of urgency is that watershed moment and the point of no return that we mentioned. This changes completely the level of requirement for the society to be united along this target. The main effort must be to unite ourselves internally. Internationally speaking, this debate that is blocked and slow, I think that's where Brazil could play an important role. Why? Because we have all kinds of realities in Brazil. We have extreme richness, we have advanced technology, we have fantastic education and extraordinary research, and on the other hand, we have inequality. So Brazil is a world on itself. And in this world on itself, we have been able to provide wonderful solutions like biofuels and everything. Biofuel is something that raises an eyebrow everywhere, but Brazil has insisted quite a lot in that and invested a lot in that, and how much we can bring over to the world when after a huge effort they got to the conclusion that biofuel is a solution for aviation and the technological solution for aviation. For navigation, this is going to be extremely crucial, and Brazil insisted along those lines, and technological advancements we have been able to produce in this area have been fantastic. So there is a micro world in this scenario that is extremely active in all its levels of complexity. But if we're able to strengthen this inner agenda in that direction, I think that our role can be extraordinary. I'm saying all that because, of course, I'm really interested in the topic, considering that we have to take negotiations forward all the way to COP30. And COP28 and COP29, the success of those COPs is something that is extremely interesting for Brazil so that we can be as successful. This is happening basically decades after the Paris Agreement, and we have to meet the requirements and the expectations from COP28 and 29 so that COP30 comes at a very decisive world scenario, and the companies are crucial for that, because companies tell you whether the economic pillar is feasible and if the solutions are also feasible. And it's important to see this kind of an effort, even in sectors which are perceived as sectors with huge hardship. And internally, we can see traceability. We know that Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Farming is working on that, and we want to be ahead of the game. Brazil is not. Brazil does not have any reason to fear this agenda, because we have the capacity to be better than the other countries, and the carbon markets, the carbon credits that come from Brazil must have a level of quality that reach the highest prices all over the world. And for Brazilian products like soy, beef, all of these products where there's a lot of talk about, we have to be able to have the best traceability, because we have everything. We have governance, we have institutions, and we have sciences here in Brazil. Academia is backing all this up. So I'm very optimistic, and I think the challenge is for us to work within Brazil and have a very strong positioning. Even now at COP28, we have to walk inside the next COP as a united country. And this is a huge difference from previous years. And this extraordinary message is going to pave the way in a very interesting manner all the way to COP30, with the type of leadership Brazil exercises. It's not something that we claim to ourselves, but other people tell us we have to achieve. Well, thank you, André. This convergence you mentioned, and this private sector has shown to the government that, we have the deforestation and everything. Very few countries in the world can preserve and produce. This is not a reality in Europe and in other countries, but this is something we do in here. This is a different logics, and we have to lead as the example. And you mentioned the microcosmos, as you mentioned, with all the difficulties we have this micro universe. This is something that is not at scale, but we have a micro universe in there for science or private sector. And over 50% of our companies somehow operate in there. But we still need to do a lot, and this convergence for us to keep moving forward may be a privilege we have, because we have strong NGOs, not just the private sector, and also civil society organizations, some of which CEBDS has been working with, the Foundation for the Preservation of Agriculture and the Amazon. So the private sector is involved in this kind of an initiative, and we are providing them with the contribution and initiative for them to lead by example. Maybe it's not just a matter of internal convergence, but a matter of priorities. Brazil has several opportunities in several areas, but we have to make bets for this to take place. And which are the bets that the world needs to understand as a priority? Illegal logging is evident, of course, but there are several other bets. You mentioned agriculture. Now we go back to Amazon for traceability and how important that is. One thing is the company doing the traceability and doing more competitive approaches in here. Well, Marina, you mentioned the opportunities and the challenges, and when I look into Brazil, I see a lot more opportunities than challenges. Even the challenges, when I look into them, I feel a sense of responsibility when I look at this from my company, from JBL. And for 70 years, we have been the largest employers in Brazil, 148,000 staff members. And FIPE's survey shows that our business represents 2.1% of the GDP, and when we talk about employment, 2.73%. So even when I see a challenge, I see a sense of responsibility, and we have to work as transforming agents. And I see that in Brazil, only less than 2% of the investment that goes to climate change are basically going to agriculture. And we see that agriculture is a great potential of carbon capture and producing energy and the feedstock, so we can meet the requirement in this area. And we try and show what Brazil can do, producing more with less. In the last 40 years, productivity in Brazil has grown by 400%. So it's basically 3.3% every month. And the world has 1.7% of increase in productivity as a rate. And Brazil is almost double that. If you look over the last 30 years, cattle farming in Brazil has doubled that in the last 20 years, and we reduced the areas by 13%. So we know how to do that. I keep looking at this, and I keep looking to traceability and from cattle farming and the need to produce food items. We have 150 million hectares pasture, and 55 or 60% of that has some level of degradation. If we are to get 12,000 hectares, we can produce 17.7 million additional cattle heads. This is over 60% what Brazil produced last year alone, so we have a huge opportunity ahead of us. The challenge in this is the size of the country and the complexity of working in an integrated chain. It's difficult for a Brazilian company to have the whole visibility of its chain and to act positively so we can, make this a priority. Because of the size of Brazil, the state of Pará is larger than Colombia itself. It's 3 times as large as France, and when we see our chain, it's kind of detached and disconnected. So we have to talk about deforestation with no shadow of a doubt, and we have been doing our share. For over 12 years, we have had zero tolerance when it comes to deforestation. The area we control is bigger than Texas and Oklahoma together, so that our direct vendors are not deforesting, in fact. And now we are working in the blockchain area to get indirect investors as well. Now we have this coalition with the Pará government and the Nature Conservancy and other bodies looking for innovation solutions on top of this, but it's impossible for a company to sort this challenge out on their own. Why? Well, this is a large chain, and if vendors don't sell it to us, they would sell it to other people who have a different kind of responsibility to the environmental scenario. So this goes along the lines of what the ambassador mentioned here. The final solution for Brazil to sort this out is to have a mandatory traceability system to enable us to have the same solutions and standards. And we're collaborating on that. So we're talking to the government with entities and associations because this is a solution and the main challenge for us. And John Kerry said, look, we're reducing deforestation around the world. And Brazil has the chance to do that. Thank you, Tomazoni. Veronica? Well, I'm not going to take too long. I'd like to highlight what the ambassador said. Brazil has an abundance of natural resources, and we're blessed by God, as per George Benjor said, but our main challenge is to engage the civil society in all of the requirements. We are able to engage a civil society in this long-term view so that we can establish the priorities and how we can get there with clarity, with a fiscal framework that is fair to everyone, one that promotes and doesn't block this scenario for the development of the Brazilian society, economically speaking and environmentally speaking. So long-term view that has to be longer than 4 years is something that is longer than 4 years, with a granularity that is enough for us to promote safety for investors so that we can bring our solutions to invest in long-term projects, thus bringing a better balance to the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, André, Tomazoni, Veronica. After those inspiring words by John Kerry as well, talking about sense of urgency, I think we have a responsibility here to have a pact. It's a little bit of a pact, which we're proposing, and also a responsibility, so that we can get to COP at Belém, saying that in terms of the inequality here in Brazil, we're looking at the Amazon and we're looking into solving that problem. So it is great responsibility, and this is just the beginning of the discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you, everyone. We are now composed our second panel of the day. The panel is named Fighting Inequality, an Agenda for Business Action. In this panel, each speaker will have 5 minutes to present the initiative by their organization, and then we're going to start our debate. Once again, I invite to stage Peter Barker. He's the president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I invite Cristiano Pinto da Costa, CEO of Shell, Brazil. Emanuele Moraes, Citizenship and Sustainability Manager at CEBDS. Nick Hurd, Chair of GST Impact, who will be joining us online. And now, I invite Neca Setúbal, sociologist, PhD in social psychology and president of the Chidi Setúbal Foundation, to moderate this debate. Neca, you have the floor. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure being here with you. I'd like to thank Marina, Ricardo. It's an honor being here in this panel in a topic that is so important to me. Fighting inequality. I believe this is one of the greatest problems we have in the world today, especially in Brazil of today. I believe we're living an economic system where we can no longer think that an economic system is only profit-based. And we have then to think, what's the role that the companies have today? What impact the companies need to have in the world, in humankind, and in the planet? For that, we have to think, what's the paradigm? How are we going to revise this paradigm? What's the paradigm that we need to leave to the planet? I believe the panel, this was brought up, the urgency with which we have to act when we talk about the environment, and also for the companies. What role do they have for us to build a more fair and egalitarian society? Brazil today is the economy which is the 10th GDP in the world, 10th largest GDP. At the same time, we're among the 10 most unequal countries. We always talk about the point of no return, environmentally speaking, and I've been saying that if we don't tackle very seriously fighting inequality, we're going to reach a point of no return. Those inequalities will be so serious that we're not going to be able to think of this society because the social fiber will be so worn off that we're not going to be able to bring together those points. We're going to be so far apart, we're not going to be to put everything and everyone together. So I believe that fighting inequality is a core point, and it is also a core point thinking about the environmental issues, because when we think of the environment issues, those who will be dealing with that the most and will be harmed the most, it is indeed the most vulnerable populations. And in Brazil, the environmental issues, they have a color, because indeed those who suffer the most are the African descendant populations. And when we talk about inequalities, it's not a natural phenomenon, it is a construction. It is social, political, economic. We see that in history. And to change those, we cannot continue doing the same things we've always done our whole lives, even if they're well done. We have to think of new issues. We have to look for new questions so that we can get new answers. And today, I think we're going to be able to debate and think, what's the role of the companies? These are very complex issues. And therefore, we have to think questions that involve public policies, the government, the private sector, academia, and civil society. I think that's what we have to think of today, especially the companies that have a critical role through the opportunities they generate in the value chain. Today, we're going to think how the private sector can act to combat inequality. This panel will deepen the advances of this agenda in Brazil and around the world, bring initiatives that aim to address this enormous challenge. As we have said already, each of the panelists will have 4 minutes to present their initial ideas, and then we're going to have questions so then we can kick off our debate. I'd like to start with Peter Baker, who will be presenting for 4 minutes, and now I'll give the floor to him. Please.
4 minutes, there we go. So, good morning again. There's now hard evidence coming out of the Edelman Trust Barometer that the higher the inequality in a society, the more the polarization in society will emerge. You've seen it here in your country. I just came out of Chile, you see it there, you see it everywhere. The political middle in society is disappearing, and you're either left or you're right, and it swings all the time. And that makes for very uncomfortable bedfellows for businesses. We also see that inequality is actually getting worse, not better. Things like COVID have hit the poorest people hardest. Climate change and a lack of capacity to adapt to climate change have hit the poorest societies hardest. The cost of living crisis, obviously, is creating havoc. And you may think that this is a big problem in Brazil. I'm Dutch, the Netherlands, number 11 economy in the world, small country, 17 million people live there. Next year, 2024, as a result of the cost of living crisis, 1 million of those 17 million people will live below the poverty line. This is the number 11 economy in the world. This is scandalous and now everywhere. So we need to get to this agenda in a very serious way. It is from a political instability, from cohesion in society, and from a business point of view, the license to operate is being challenged. And inequality is not just about the difference in income or the difference in wealth, it is also the difference of well-being and the difference of opportunities that people have to develop themselves and the future of their families. So about 2 years ago, at WBCSD, the World Business Council, we launched what is called the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality. If we're fair about it, most business leaders will say, yep, our job as business is to create jobs. The rest of this problem is up to the governments. And we believe that that's not true. So in the last 2 years, 40 CEOs of global companies, together with 25 NGOs, UN and academic partners, have worked on what is inequality, why is inequality a systemic risk, why will that systemic risk become a business risk, and how and what can businesses do to respond to those risks. The systemic risks, they're pretty obvious. You know, the political environment is volatile, instability, supply chains will become more and more unstable. You see the amount of work disruption, strikes and others go up. Very interesting case at this point in time unfolding in the USA, in the automotive sector. And reputation risk, license to operate of business is now sincerely being tested. So business must act on this agenda. But what can we do? And that's really where we are today in this global flagship report that we launched, and no doubt through Marina and her team we can all give you access to that. But we've basically broken down what are the 5 areas that business should contemplate now acting upon. And they cut from how can we make our products more affordable and accessible? What can we do to create decent work and jobs? What can we do to more equally and fairly distribute value? And last but not least, what can we do to enable government policies to be effective? And all of this in a time where we need to radically transform, as I said in my introduction, our economies towards a decarbon and nature-positive world. So in these transformations, and we've had examples in the previous panel, and I'm sure we'll have it in this one, how do we make sure that these transitions are just, that we understand what the impacts on people are and how we take them along in those journeys? So I'm sure in this panel we'll talk about some more Brazil-specific items of it, but that's the global picture. Business Commission to Tackle Inequality, report is out, and actually tomorrow in a session in Sao Paulo we'll go deep on Brazil.
Thank you. And now, please, Nick Hurd.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm sorry not to be there in person. I lived in Brazil for 5 fantastic years, but I apologize for staying in my native language. It's a pleasure to follow Peter. My lens is a slightly different one. My background is political. I was a British government minister for 9 years, and I chair an organization called GSG. What is GSG? We're an organization that is active now in 40 countries around the world. What do? We try and create the conditions whereby more private capital can be allocated and flow in search of positive social impact alongside financial return. The birth of this organization has its roots in the British G7 presidency in 2013-14, when the British Prime Minister asked us to set up a global task force to look at how we could scale the global market for what we called then social investment. Money looking to combine measurable positive social return with financial return. Fast forward to 2023-4, and this organization is now active, as I said, in 40 countries, including Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Colombia, Central America, Chile. This has become a genuinely global movement. And in each of these countries, we bring together entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, academics, and intermediaries to collaborate in building markets that allow more capital to flow, as I said, that is proactively seeking to make a positive social and environmental impact, and to build demonstration effect that this is possible without compromising return requirements. Now, some of the countries in this network are just starting. Others, like my own, have been doing this for 10 years. To give you an idea, as a reference point, in the UK, the social investment market, as we call it, has grown from almost nothing in 2012 to be worth over $10 billion this year, with measurable impact in helping to provide better solutions to complex social problems that drive inequality, such as lack of affordable homes, inadequate support for homeless people, too many children in care, too many people in prison, difficulties for young people getting into work. Across all this policy landscape, we can now point to social investment making a difference. Now, as part of helping this global movement, we at GSG, we work with the G7 and we work with the G20. We were asked in 2021, again by the British, to set up a global task force to look at this question of how we accelerate the flow of investment that's looking to make a positive social and environmental impact, especially in emerging economies. And this year we are the implementation partner to the Japanese G7 presidency in their initiative, which is about trying to increase the flow of private investment looking to make an impact on reducing inequalities in global health. What is our belief system? We believe that we have to change the way that resources are allocated in our global economy. We have to correct a core problem that companies do not account for their impact and markets do not value impact. We believe that we have to integrate consideration of impact into business and investment decision-making alongside risk and return. The third lens, as we call it, impact, risk, and return. And we have to work towards a future in which institutional investors that manage our money are empowered to allocate more capital for positive impact, especially in emerging economies where the impact and the risks are highest. This is what we do every day, whether it's helping to develop a national impact strategy in Brazil or developing new investment vehicles to make it easier for SMEs to access finance in Ghana, or developing career impact bonds to help disadvantaged young people upskill to get better jobs in the United States, or working with global standard setters to make sure that the emerging sustainability disclosure requirements, really important, really understand the needs of emerging economies and small businesses. This is the work that we do every day towards integrating impact more into the decision-making processes in our global economy, because that is the path, we believe, is the path to reducing inequality, averting climate and biodiversity catastrophe, and rebuilding confidence in capitalism and the liberal democracies which our capitalism model underpins. Thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce us.
Thank you. Bom, agora Cristiano.
Well, now, Cristiano.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Neca. Marina, once again, thank you. Beyond the Brazilian Business Council have such an important role, it is a pleasure being involved in any activity with the Brazilian Business Council. So thank you for the invitation, the opportunity of being here. So first, perhaps, starting with a more individual perspective and then speaking about the company a bit more. I think the importance of the current social contribution cannot be underestimated. The world has changed a lot, and we cannot underestimate the needs that every company has to raise the bar on what was done before. As it was well mentioned here, the purpose of the company being beyond just generating value. The needs that we have in Brazil are enormous. We saw the numbers and we deal with that in our everyday routine. Peter mentioned a change in the behavior from understanding that it's a responsibility of the other government, to now taking this responsibility, even in the private initiative, in partnership with the government, bringing more initiatives to fill the social gap that we have. I had an opportunity with the company to live 12 years abroad in Europe and in the United States, where I saw a bigger sense of responsibility by the individual and by the corporation. So I think we still have some catching up to do as a society. I think there's also a bigger role, not only about raising the bar for our peers where we work, but also in the supply chain that work with us. JBS was talking about the impact they're having in the supply chain. This is another very important point from each corporation. There is the very strong effect I've been feeling more and more in the company, which is the demand by our workers. The workforce is more modern, more diverse as we advance in inclusion.
And they have a huge demand, placing a lot of responsibility in the leadership of the companies. You have a much stronger role in the social area, and we see a level of engagement that is quite high for our staff members in all of the social investment activities the company does, thus triggering a sense of ownership and purpose and a loyalty that is much higher. If none of these reasons are to convince corporations that this is the path to go, I firmly believe that if a company does not address quite strongly the increase in social impact, this company is not going to exist in the forthcoming years or decades. Recently, Shell launched a strategy 2 years ago, and we have 4 pillars in our strategy for generating value for our shareholders. We have the pillar of having zero net emissions by 2050, but we also have 2 more pillars, driving people's lives forwards in their ecosystem and in their society, and to respect the environment. So we have incorporated in that in the way that we try to sort things out on a daily basis. Social investments go through 3 main axes: entrepreneurship, scientific investigation, and access to energy. So everything we do falls under each of these axes. So we have Shell Iniciativa Jovem, or Shell Youth Initiative, which tries to develop entrepreneurial behavior in youth, and it's a program that has been around for 23 years. We have over 500 companies that have grown and that generate jobs and over 200 million reais in revenue in these companies. And we have the KIPEA program that Mariana Gross mentioned in the opening, which fosters debate and the quality of life for people living in the Quilombola area, in the Quilombos. There are maybe 2 different areas: research and development, that Peter mentioned in the opening. So innovation is a tool for social inclusion, and we believe quite strongly in that. Shell invests quite a lot in research and development. We do that through partnerships with universities and research centers in Brazil, and we try and have our projects of a social aspect. We have a project called Brave that happens in the countryside of Bahia, and we try to develop the generation of ethanol for the agave plant, because depending on what you do, you can have a higher productivity for that plant's growth, and then generation of ethanol in that area. And if that works at this stage in research and development, you can bring social impact to an area that is quite poor in the country. So research and development has an aspect of a social component that is really important in our opinion. And last but not least, the relevance of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The company wants to be one of the most diverse companies all over the world, and we are extremely proud to have this network of productivity in the company. And we work in a volunteer basis, the B-Power, which is basically for Black communities, enabling people with deficiency, True Colors for LGBT, and I always forget there is one more, Gender Balance, and one more, which is an innovation here in Brazil, the first time that this was done in Brazil in the Shell Group, This is about bringing debates for age groups, and it's important for us to have this commitment for targets in 2025 and increasing the level of the competitivity and the participation in this company. And we treat this as many other targets in the company, like, profit sharing, revenue, or environment. So this is a tool for us to reduce inequality, as Peter said, that has been growing all over the world. Thank you. Emmanuel. Well, thank you, Neka. Thank you, CEBDS, for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the cooperative approach for credit. And it's important to say that CCOB and other credit cooperations are financial institutions offering services and financial products regulated by the central bank, and we meet all of the requirements of the regulator and the regulating company, and we are an alternative to the traditional market. In order to talk about reducing inequalities and everything, it's important for us to talk about this business model for credit cooperation. On its own, it brings this balance between social and economic, because cooperatives are basically a group of people and not a group of capital investment. When a company is born in a territory, it's born to solve a problem of an economic nature in the region, thus promoting also social environment. And we call that of a virtuous cycle of cooperativism. Because where cooperative companies are, they allocate resources for the local economy, for micro companies, small companies, for agriculture, and that is returned to the cooperative approach. And this is something that delivers products and services at a fair price to the society. And this leads to a balance in this market and a return to society in the territories where the cooperatives operate. At CCOB, we have citizenship and sustainability at the top of our strategy, so all of the value delivery in our business is focused on citizenship and sustainability, because our focus is to promote financial justice and the prosperity of the territories we're operating in. And we do that by looking into two main fronts for fighting inequality. The World Bank places financial citizenship as a foundation in the reduction of inequalities. And we're talking about financial inclusion and financial education. So we're looking into taking access to credit and financial products where this is scarce. And 60% of our physical participation is located in municipalities of up to 50,000 inhabitants. Over 5 million people that are part of CCOB are from classes C, D, and E, and we want to achieve 70% of these social classes in our member roster, because we understand that financial inclusion is the main role for reducing inequality. And that comes along with financial education. We say that credit is a weapon that can either kill or save someone. And without financial education, it's probably going to kill people. So that's why we have a very strong and guided work when we take financial education along with financial inclusion. We are 338 singular cooperative companies, and we are spread all over the country. And in over 300 municipalities, we are the only financial institution that is present in there, which strengthens the role and the responsibility we have towards financial inclusion, where our cooperative companies have a very important role to play in a local network that is linked to all of this confirmation. Commercial associations, civil society, and all others. And we work by offering financial products and services at a fair price, along with inclusion and education. And we have a very strong social participation in private investment, particularly for entrepreneurial education, financial education, social and activist participation. And I wanted to wrap up by mentioning what the Secretary General of the United Nations said when it comes to the role of the cooperative and social engagement. And the UN acknowledges that cooperative companies have a very important role in the development and access to development by those that are least favored in the society. Not just the United Nations, but the central bank in Brazil reinforces the role of the cooperative approach, and the Secretary General of the UN mentions to member states how important it is to value and motivate cooperative approaches in their countries. As a business model, we understand that our role, in essence, is to exist so we can promote local development. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's move over to the Q&A. We're going to start off with Nick. Nick, you mentioned a very strong agenda, exemplifying clearly how this is not just meeting inequalities, not just a matter of a governmental operation. I think in Brazil, we're beginning to have that kind of a conscience, and Cristiano mentioned that quite a lot. We had this level of awareness of, okay, inequality is something that belongs to the government. I have nothing to do with that. I think that we still have that mindset still these days, but we're still trying to think differently. I think that you made that quite clear when you did your presentation here, and you talked about how companies are taking over that kind of responsibility. So that was very clear to us. You also mentioned during your approach in general terms about this, but thinking more of the Brazilian, more specific scenario, and as I said in the beginning, when we think about Brazil and the inequalities that we have in the country, inequalities in here in Brazil are linked to the racial issue. Inequalities in Brazil are pretty much in line with most of the population being made up of black citizens. So how do you consider that in the Brazilian context? How can we see inequality versus a structural racism? How do you consider this, like companies facing structural racism in the country? How can this agenda be approached? I hope you have understood my question.
First off, we're the World Business Council. So when we write with these 40 commissioners' report, this is a global landscape of inequality. And that is an important statement to make. Climate change affects all of us. There's one atmosphere, we all need to decarbonize, and we need to do it quick. Inequality, and nature, by the way, similarly, is very localized. So if discrimination or racial inequality is the big driver in Brazil, then that may not be the driver at all in Europe or in other parts of the world. So the next step beyond this Business Commission to Tackle Inequality report is that we now need to sit down in Brazil, in Latin America, say how do we customize, focus the actions in this report to the situation that we find here. And so tomorrow afternoon, other part of Sao Paulo, big session with business leaders on take the global recommendations, translate them into the Brazilian context. That's not to not give an answer, but the way that the answer will be given is, in the flagship report, there are 10 action areas identified that businesses can contemplate. So maybe a few examples of that, access to essential products and services at affordable prices is one of the action areas. What can business in Brazil do to make affordable access to certain services available to the people who are most hit by inequality, racially or for other reasons? Inclusion, diversity and equity policies in companies. How can we make that a norm in Brazilian businesses? So that indeed, if certain groups are disadvantaged, there's a policy in the House to make sure that that disadvantage is not reflected in the workforce? Future of work. What can we do to make sure that disadvantaged groups actually have access to the best education programs, so that whatever education disadvantage they may have had in the system can be compensated in business-driven education programs? Well, I can go on with more of those examples, but that will actually be the way that you turn 10 action areas. Some may be very relevant in Brazil, others may less, but can turn them into a Brazilian agenda that then Brazilian businesses and business leaders can put their weight behind.
Thank you. Nick, você falou muito dos vários desafios.
Nick, you mentioned a lot of your challenges when it comes to your commitment to the impact agenda and how this agenda is a win-win agenda where all sides in this area can win and that we have a financial return to investors, that there is this commitment on generating a social and environmental impact. But if this is a win-win agenda which can trigger the social and environmental impact, thus generating a return to investors. You mentioned risks about that and how important that agenda is. So what are we still missing? What can we do more so that this agenda can be broadened? What is feasible? And what is it that we need to do more and more? Because I feel that in Brazil, we still need to do a lot more for people to be able to understand this impact agenda, because quite often people say, no, but I do this kind of, philanthropic work, and they don't understand what an impact or a social impact agenda is, and they mix that with a philanthropic approach.
Excellent question. This is not philanthropy. This is not ESG. This is not corporate social responsibility. This is about changing the way that our financial system works and creating the incentives for more private capital to flow for public good. And we need it because there will never be enough public money to meet the SDGs or the climate goals. And if we don't meet these goals, there are big systemic risks attached to that, and that is becoming clearer every day. So the stakes are very high. And the movement we're part of is a young movement, but it's worth, depending on how you measure it, between $1 and $2 trillion today. So it's not insignificant, and it's growing very fast. And there are at least two things that are blowing wind in our sails. The first is generational. Over the next 20 years, we will see the biggest transfer of wealth between generations in our history, worth around $100 trillion. So the values of the generation that inherit that wealth and how they deploy that capital is absolutely critical, and that process is starting. The second is technology. Technology has completely changed how we interact as human beings over the last 10, 15 years. It will transform the landscape of opportunity for us to invest for impact, because technology is transforming our ability to make social and environmental impact and to report and measure on social and environmental impact. Combine that with the evidence growing every day and every year that business as usual carries systemic risk, and we can see the plates beginning to shift in favor of the change that capitalism needs in order to survive. What are the difficulties, you ask? What I've learned from 14 years in politics, if you're trying to change anything, your biggest challenge is system inertia. And that's what we're battling and challenging, and that's why it's so good to hear other panelists like Peter talking about this. But it is system inertia that is the biggest headwind, and we need to break that down. We think a big lever of change is what we call impact transparency. Companies need to account for their impact. We as investors and stakeholders and customers and employees need to understand the impact of the companies we we support through our customer, through our work. And that process is starting. And we also need to create more opportunities for institutional investors, the big investors, to invest for impact. And that's the work we do, trying to help build demonstration effect so that people can feel more comfortable and more courageous in allocating more capital for explicit, proactive, intentional, positive impact as a core optimizer of return, not something done at the margin.
Thank you. Cristiano, você colocou vários projetos que a Shell está...
Cristiano, you mentioned several projects that Shell is putting together for youth, like inclusion projects for several different areas of diversity in the company. This is really interesting. And this is it. So when we're talking about ESG, and in Brazil, as we mentioned, the S part of ESG is where companies really drop the ball a little and have fewer projects. So I really didn't know that in detail, and I wanted to know more about that because it's really interesting. And you mentioned how these are projects that I believe and understand are projects that Shell staff members are very proud in developing. So I wanted to hear from you how you measure this kind of a social impact by initiatives such as this one, not internally only, but also externally for the target audience. Internally, you foster this kind of a mindset with your staff members, but is there any kind of a pressure by society for that? Because what I feel nowadays when we talk about this, like for example, the beginning of the panel today, mentioned that society nowadays somehow puts pressure on companies so that they don't generate only profit for their shareholders. Somehow the society is putting the pressure on companies so that they cause an impact in the communities in the areas where they operate. Do you feel there is a pressure from society towards Shell so that the company shows a social impact for the community and society at large? Can you gauge that social impact?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It is a pleasure being able to talk a little bit more about our projects. The company has benefited with the presence of Roberto in the company for many years. How can we measure it? It's hard. Even without the effort we put in, it's hard to quantify. The company, globally, publishes a sustainability report where it is very clear the activities that we have and what kind of reach we have in terms of a positive impact. Always been careful not to exacerbate and then having a backlash or to reverse with some type of criticism. We have certain tools, and with other projects, we have certain criteria in efficiency, and we try at the end of the project to have some sort of balance, intervals, talk a little with those with whom we had the partnership, the projects where we invested, and try to measure a little of the impact that we had. This also helps us calibrate, adjust the renewal for the investment for that project in particular, but also bring the knowledge for the prioritizing of future projects. There are a few other tools that perhaps are a little less traditional, but we've been using them a lot. Sit down to talk with the community where you had the partnership with, those involved in the project. Companies such as ours and large companies of engineers, infrastructure, sometimes we are really mathematic based. We want everything in a spreadsheet, but rather we should sit down, listen, and practice active listening a little bit more so that humanly we can connect a bit more with those in that project. This has been a more qualitative source, sometimes quantitative as well, but it's been also pleasant doing that. So this is another way we can do it. We also try to measure the impact in competition. Sometimes my team comes and said, well, but listen, that company is doing this and that. Veronica and myself will also exchange ideas between Shell, Econômico, and others. Oh, there's this company that have a similar project, similar to ours. And I say, listen, this is good. I'm glad they're doing, and I hope they have better projects than what we have so that we're uncomfortable and we raise our bar. So this is another way we can measure what the industry as a whole, the company, and how the others are responding to the programs that Shell are launching. A third dimension that perhaps is taking greater dimension, and we've been pushing it in-house, is the supply chain. I recognize that for a company as big as Shell, it's easier to have social investments with social impact. As I go up the supply chain, those who hired the other and hired the other and hired the other, it's a little bit hard. Something that we've been talking about in our procurement department is to switch our hiring process. Don't take into consideration just the quality or price of the product, but include other conditions as well in your contract, in your evaluation criteria, so that you can encourage a different supplier that perhaps has a different social perspective, but also that you can raise the bar in the supply chain as a whole. And more, we see suppliers coming to us with a pitch for a product of a price, but also with a pitch of the social impact they're having. So these are perhaps less traditional, less math-based, but we are using that to measure the social impact as well. And the last one, perhaps, the longevity of the projects we're in. We have the youth initiative for 23 years now, and now with the Rouanet law, a incentive law in Brazil, we have also, even with the challenges, we had this for 35 years in the country already. So the legacy that we're going to have in our projects is also another way we can measure the success of what we've been doing. I'm happy to listen about the qualitative evaluation from engineers, and also think about stakeholders and looking at the qualitative aspect. It's really good as well, because indeed social projects must have a qualitative perspective. So I'm happy, and also listening. So I'm happy to hear that. Emmanuel, I really enjoy the cooperatives, so I'm really happy for you to be here. I mean, we don't have a just cookie cutter solution for all situations, but when we talk about the cooperatives and financial institutions, this is really important. And I'd like to listen to you a little bit more. I mean, you already mentioned something about the fact that you guys provide financial education. So I'd like to listen a little bit more about sociability, the building of a social fabric, because I believe that, when you reach small communities, you have this role of building that sociability, building a social fabric, education. Can you talk a little bit about that? This is something I believe. Yes, Neka. Something that is inherent to cooperatives is the ability to dialogue with the territories, the communities where we are present. So, this vocation on being present physically in the territory, although we also work in digital channels very strongly, but our essence is in the presence in the territory, because we understand that we have to listen to this community. We have to give them a voice to their territory so that solutions can be built together. So I believe that one of the main ways we can contribute to this construction of the social fabric, reducing inequalities, is as we understand the problem of the territory, we can direct the allocation of resources for the economical vocation in the territory, so that the territory can begin to prosper. And it's very interesting because we have a research from 2019 where we have comparison between territories where we have and don't have financial cooperation. they have a GDP that is 6% higher, more than 16% more initiatives of the companies locally, and we believe that this is connected to this movement of resources allocation for local development, and also for the dialogue in the sense of tackling social problems in the territory. Then it's important to say that when we bring financial education, the cooperation, education, and for entrepreneurship, we understand that it's not just about offering products and services and products financially speaking, but we have to also provide them support for the territory to develop, and we never do that alone. We are very collaborative, and of course we have to be as a cooperative, but where you see a system of credit units of Brazil, you're going to see association with the business, commercial association, CEBDS, other institutions of the civil society, with churches, and indeed, we see all that diversity when we are together in the assemblies. Our more than 7 million members have their voice to contribute. And just to finalize, last year, in 2022, we had more than 20 million in economy generated for those members. So what happened to those 20 million? They are reinvested in the local economy. So we believe that this is a front, a tool in cooperation, also with the other initiatives, so that we can move from this poverty scenario that we have in Brazil. Thank you. Marina, can we have another round of questions? Real quick. Okay, let's be quick. So the second round. I'm going to get off the script a little bit with you, Nick. And I want to say that I'm going to be off script a little bit, but currently I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. We are living in a moment of war, in a moment of economic crisis that is so serious that we're going through. The agenda of inequality, is it going to continue to be a reality for the companies with this economic crisis that we're going through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are quite serious reasons to believe that, you know, if you look at the war in the Middle East at the moment, inequality is a big part of what motivates that. So what we see more and more is the higher the inequality is in a society, the lower the social cohesion, the more risky and unpredictable the outcomes in society are. So we have no option but to continue to work hard on this. For business, for many businesses, there's great examples on stage, but for many businesses this is a new agenda. But let me be very clear, I was talking this morning about the need to drive in a corporate performance and accountability system. That is coming to the social impact world as well. So we have TCFD in climate turning into an ISSB disclosure framework for climate disclosures. In 3 to 4 years from now, the TISFD, the Task Force for Inequality and Social-Related Financial Impacts, will lead to an ISSB disclosure framework around social impact. And then all businesses in the world must measure their social impact and will be held accountable for the societal impacts they have on business. That's the future where we're going to go. This will become more important for business, need to learn to manage these issues, and nothing will stop us from that.
Thank you. Nick, qual que é a importância de trabalharem juntos setor
what's the
público
importance of having public and private sector working together to drive this agenda of the impact investment? Essa questão da colaboração
is absolutely critical. Government is a very powerful actor. It has the power to legislate, it has the power to incentivize, it has the power to convene, it has huge procurement power. Our colleague from Shell was talking about their policy. In the UK, we introduced Social Value Act that required our procurement process to account for the social value associated with their procurement decisions. So government is a very, very powerful actor and heavily incentivized to enlist the support of the private sector, both in terms of capital and innovation. And in the Brazil context, very quickly and very finally, what strikes me is that Brazil has an extraordinary opportunity to accelerate off the base and show some leadership to the world. You've decided to take on the G20 and COP. You're embarking on an ecological transition plan that, if executed, will have a seismic effect on the economy. And as you've discussed before, that carries great risk, great opportunity, but also great risk in terms of the inequality agenda, because this transition has to make sure that people and places are not left behind, and that it does not deepen inequality in a country as important as Brazil. And this is critical because without the just element of this transition, the transition won't happen because it will lack popular support. And if it lacks popular support, it will lack political support. So all the incentives are aligned to try and support and encourage Brazil under the leadership of President Lula to be one of the first countries in the world to prioritize the just transition and to make sure that that investment in social infrastructure, social capital, that investment to make sure that inequality is not widened in this transition process seems to me a really, really important opportunity, and I congratulate you for discussing it in the way you have done today.
Thank you. Cristiano, você colocou...
Cristiano, you talked about internal issues. You really talked about how the social impact is measured. You talked about the stakeholders, which was very important. How do you see the biggest challenges by Shell in terms of specific territories when you talk about and think of Brazil? What are the challenges in the territories when we think about Brazil, specific challenges in Brazil? A particular territory in terms of social impact. Challenges you mean for us to implement our social agenda? Well, maybe one of the 3 or 4 reflections we can make is, the first is finding projects that are long-lasting, that will leave a legacy to that community with whom we have this partnership. Because we can see very well a positive impact when we start the project in that community. But it is very clear also that once we leave, the opposite will happen. So this is one of the greatest challenges. How can we identify a project and be able to commit to it with longevity and leaving a legacy there? I believe the second is how to impact that community. I think this is something that Emanuele talked about, way beyond the financial assistance that comes with that project. Yes, you have to provide financial assistance, but you have to have that community, that project, that initiative also have to provide the development of human capital so that they can develop the tools so that they can carry on their own without the presence of a company such as Shell, CCOP, or whichever it may be. So management tools, project management tools, education, they're all challenges. How can we include that in the agenda of a project and be sure that you're able to create in a sustainable manner an impact in that community, in that project, in that association with which you worked? Perhaps the third biggest challenge, and this is something that Nick talked about, which is the inertia in the government. The ability of acting as a collaboration actor, kind of as a broker between the multiple parts that need to make that happen and not give up with the difficulties that will present themselves along the way.
I have a very clear example, and here I'm looking at a colleague here. We signed a partnership at the end of last year with Jardim Botânico in Rio de Janeiro. I know I'm the state of São Paulo, but the company is based in Rio de Janeiro. And I remember how many times during the journey, and because there are many government bodies involved, all the difficulties that they also have. So there were times when the team was unsure, but we said, no, let's stay at it. And then the resilience, the articulation capacity, all that was a challenge, but that was key for us to be able to sign the partnership. And then in next year, we're going to have the largest biodiversity museum in Latin America, which is the Jardim Botânico Museum in Rio de Janeiro. So the capacity of articulate and resist to inertia, I believe this is another challenge. For sure, from my experience, I always say partnership with the government is essential, but this is a given. This is a given. Oh, we're going to have a new secretary. Okay, you can complain about it. Every 2 years, there will be a new secretary there, and everything will start from scratch. Okay? So that's it. This is a fact. This is a given, and you have already to count on that, expect that. And that's how it has to be. I mean, it's not that it has to be like that, but that's how it is. So let's do it anyway. And anyway, but everything works. In the end, everything works out. We have to consider that, but anyway. Well, wrapping up, Marina, I'm about to finish. Emanuele, how the system of credit unions of Brazil can work together with other Brazilian Business Council companies to expand and potentialize this collaboration and potentialize this reduction on inequalities. So we see a lot of potential there. Yes, as I mentioned, we are 338 cooperatives in Brazil, so we're talking about a lot of people. We're talking about more than 56,000 workers and directors, so there's a lot of potential for partnerships there. I believe, NECA, that the main forms would be through getting together in those territories where the system of credit unions in Brazil is present for projects that aim at reducing inequality, where CECOB can be the financial agent, maybe in an action directed to entrepreneurship from those in lower levels or women and other vulnerable groups. So we have opportunities to dialogue and talk about territorial opportunities. A second front, I would say, is along with the Brazilian Business Council, being protagonist in an effort for financial citizenship, financial education, which is really a priority in Brazil, considering the amount of delinquency we have, and how we need to bring that to the population and help them to organize. I think we can also think of something along those lines and contribute that way. Thank you. I'd like to wrap it up and say that at the end of the August, I was part of a group with more than 80 organizations of civil society. We launched in Brasilia a national pact to fighting social inequalities, along with Congress, with a national front in Congress. It was a mixed front with the lower chamber and the upper chamber of Congress in fighting social inequalities, being organized by the social civil societies with unions. So I'd like to finish thanking everyone and really happy with the practical aspects out of it, and especially the productive sector, although I have this family origin in the productive sector, but I also bring this advocacy with the production sector. It's a commitment, not by the government, but by everyone, by the Brazilian society, having this commitment of understanding what each and every one of us play a role in fighting inequality. Thank you, everyone, to the Brazilian Business Council to allow me to moderate this panel. Thank you very much. Thank you, NECA. Thank you, everyone, for their participation. Before I call the next panel and for them to take the picture, and let's first wait for the picture. I'd like to remind everyone before we call the next panel in, you know that in your badge there's a QR code with our activity in artificial intelligence, Reimagine, we have our agenda and also our publications. I'd like to start our third panel now, a business movement for the Amazon, the role of the business sector in the biome. I'd like to invite Patrice Selling, President, Partner of Systemic in Brazil and co-founder of AIA. I want to also call Wanda Wioto, political educator and digital activist for the Amazon, and she helped me with the pronunciation, Derekini, the brave ant. Marcelo Brito, Executive Secretary of Consortium of Governors. That's good because then we have the governors of the region. And Marcelo Salazar, the CEO of Amazon. I invite Gustavo Pinheiro, the coordinator of the portfolio of low carbon economy for Institute Climate Society.
Pela presença.
Thank you everyone for the presence. Gustavo, you have the floor. Good morning. So before lunch, this is the hunger panel. We're going to talk about things that can contribute for us to not have hunger in the world. So hang on to your hunger right now. Well, you're already introduced. Patrice, Wanda, De Marcelos. I am Gustavo. To us, it's an honor. The invitation by the Brazilian Business Council. The name of the panel is Business Movement for the Amazon, the role of the business sector in the biome. I'd like to have a quick introduction. We're going to have a talk show format. The idea is not to have lectures, but a conversation of a facilitated dialogue. I think it's important to say that the legal Amazon is 60% of the Brazilian territory, 2% of the population, 8% of the GDP. We know that portion of the Amazon is not considered in the official statistics, and we have many challenges. One of our greatest challenges, and the most obvious, is to maintain the forest standing. We already lost 25% of the territory of the forest, and the impact in the climate is also affecting actually the own development of the forest, and that scares us. So by 2025, we already passed the inflection point where we already have the savanization of the forest. Basically a desert, considering that the soil in Amazon is very sandy. In the same latitude in other countries, that's why we have deserts. And recent researches indicate that the eastern Amazon also is going through that savanization process. Researchers produced in Brazil, led by the Brazilian Research Institute, and also things that were published in the last 2 or 3 years, and things that alarmed us. So it's urgent to conserve what we have in the forest, to restore the degraded areas, and part of that is about to value the local economy, which is invisible for official statistics, and production models that are integrated to the forest that need to be regenerative. And that's why we have this urgency for gathering investments and also being aligned with the logic that we have to stop deforestation. The business sector needs to understand that. We cannot leave this degradation trace. We have a few instruments that have been developing, market instruments, something that was approved in Senate now and it's been talked about in Congress. We have a growing demand for carbon credit, which puts all the solutions agenda nature-based, also as a focus of investment that can make a difference in this journey of decarbonization in Brazil, with co-benefits for the conservation of the biome and improvement in indicators for the region. We want to talk a little bit with those who have lots of experience in related terms. We have Patricia, who was a Secretary of Development in São Paulo, Wanda, which is a political educator and indigenous activist in the Amazon, representing the region, Marcelo Brito, who today is the Executive Secretary Consortium of Governors with a long track record and experience of executive in the region, and Marcelo Salazar, who has lived in the region for 20 years or more, and that today is CEO, co-founder of Mazon Manac, which is a startup that also deals with the ingredients of biodiversity, producing regenerative products for the forest and also for those that consume, from what I understand.
Well, let's jumpstart this talk here, and I'm going to follow the same positioning we have in here. I'm going to start with Patricia. Patricia, had you produced a report called The Amazon Journey. So I wanted you to talk about the main findings of the report for the production of sustainable results in the region, and that it should be focused on people. And there is also this antagonic approach, of social development and the preservation of the forest that we have to overcome. Can you share with us a few insights, please? And just for us to understand the dynamics in here, we want to promote a back and forth here. So if you can, just 5-7 minutes for each answer, please. Well, Gustavo, it's a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to congratulate Wanda and the rest of the speakers, and CEBDS as well. I called Wanda my sister, and my daughters say, when are we going to visit Auntie Wanda? Because they had a very special experience at Wanda's place, and they played with her nieces. They climbed up trees together, and to me it was a unique experience for them to get to know real people in their first experience, not just that touristy kind of tour we do that, the Amazon is fantastic, but the reality of the Amazon from the point of view of 8-year-old children. This comes from a place of love, people who can receive as well. Wonderful fish and acai that was real acai, and it was kind of salty, so there was a real life experience, And also being with Marcelo's, both of them in here, this is fantastic. I think the report has a lot of numbers, but the first food for thought is that we cannot talk about forests without talking about people who live in there. And our food for thought in the past, when Wanda was there, in fact, was that, the UN had just released the two races, Race to Zero and Race to Resilience. And we started paying a lot of attention to Race to Zero, which is, the zero emissions, and a smaller attention to the Race to Resilience. And they started both races because one of them is about carbon, climate change, the emergency we're going through, and the other one is how do we care for the people. So when the report came out, we said it's not a race, it's a marathon to begin with the same level of attention we give to the economic and scientific aspects being granted to people as well. So the first main point is the huge opportunity we have right now, because Brazil is the only country that can present a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. If we can contain deforestation and illegal deforestation, we can meet most of the difficult part of the race to zero, and we have energy and time to do the most important aspect, which is fighting inequalities, and to do that in a dignified manner for the population. Every time I look into numbers, I think of the people, and my family is not from the Amazon. We come from Minas and Sergipe, and we lived with hunger. My father lived in a family of 16, and they all ate out of the same bucket. And we are a record breaker in hunger in Brazil. We're saying how difficult it is to be in the time before lunch, and we have millions of people with food insecurity, and they don't know if they're going to have food in their plates tomorrow, and millions of people that are officially hungry today. And in the Amazon area, the number is triple what we have in the southeast. So in the southeast, it's 1 in every 10 people that is going through hunger or food insecurity, and in Amazon, it's 1 in 3 people. So this is the first thing for us to understand. Secondly, our view of the forest, which is quite different from that of people who live with no condition in a place with little infrastructure. My indigenous family was born and raised in Minas, and I had 3 aunties with Chagas disease. And, people didn't even know that. They live with malaria, and my mother is traumatized these days. If you leave my mother in the jungle now, she's going to be very afraid. So it's a different relationship from the one we had, and we need to understand that it is different, and we live with that these days. Vanda is going to talk about that with a lot more propriety, but the role of corporations in this is really important. There is no organization that can say that they do business in the jungles without considering the lives and realities of people out there and without bringing them closer together. We work with Palladium for the last 5 years, the biggest incubator in the forest-based programs. We have 22 active projects today. And this is the work that is done with the cooperatives and with the people in the jungle. And it has a different time and allocation of things that we have in business. Brazil has the opportunity to take back with economic growth, and we have an opportunity to having 150 to 200 billion dollars per year, and a third or almost half of that is because of the forests. But that has to be done with a lot of responsibility and with people's look onto that. Last but not least, the biggest opportunity that generate resources and distribute riches from the forest has to do with the valorization or valuing of the bioeconomy, the payment of rights for decarbonization and for other things that are not even a part of the carbon market nowadays. We're regulating the carbon market now, but the market we have is based on opportunities for reforestation and regeneration. The Floresta Impact project is not quantified in this global carbon market. So these are the 3 emergencies in the economic map that was designed, on top of fighting legal activities. When it comes to creating value and opportunities, we have to generate these opportunities to distribute income in the forest area. Thank you, Patricia. Now we're going to bridge this over to Vanda. And I wanted to ask you, as a person who dwells in the Amazon and in all of your research and everything, we know that we have a lot that needs to be transformed and a lot that has to evolve in the relationship between production and the region, and the way that businesses and corporations relate to this area, so we can avoid the track of degradation that was caused in the past. Which pathways should the corporate scenario follow to be successful in this transformation movement for initiatives which may combine production and conservation and the respect for traditional peoples, so that we are able to overcome the narrative which quite often happens when people say, look, there's a lot of land for very few indigenous people, and we have scary debates such as the Marco Temporal one. So what should the corporate scenario do to move forward? Hi, Haridekwe, Komamekwe, Kaimakakai Bija. Good morning, everyone, one and all. It's important for me to be in this scenario. in this space. I come from the Amazon area and I belong to the Witoto peoples in the tribal border of the Solimões River. And right now we're facing our main challenge. I don't know if you know, but the Amazon state is going through a severe drought period, and in 130 years, today we have reached the lowest water level. I come from the banks of the Solimões River that is dry. Not even small canoes can navigate it in front of our communities. So we can start this conversation as to how this sector can cooperate with this particular moment. I wanted to know who of you know about the situation and how many of you have somehow collaborated for reducing impacts in there. Very few people, right? Well, these initiatives have to be a part of the real life of such communities. When we talk about environmental racism, when we talk about structural racism, the indigenous population is never mentioned. I'm the only person at this event of an indigenous nature, and we are placed in a vulnerability scenario, and a historic vulnerability at that. For us to consider how we can move forward and how we can bring real changes, we need to acknowledge the presence of this indigenous population in the Brazilian land and how crucial they are for facing climate changes. Because when we think about the Floresta de Pé program, this is a topic that is quite uh, cumbersome and bothers us quite a lot. We don't have only standing forests, we have other types of forests that are not standing anymore. And for us to keep them alive, the indigenous people must be standing and must be alive and kicking, because this is the kind of a population who is historically murdered in our country because they protect the forest and they protect their territories. And it's in these territories we have a social biodiversity that is alive and kicking. And these territories have this living forest, and this is basically the main target for the sustainability meetings. I come from a process of silencing Witotos in Brazil that has lasted 100 years. My people comes from Colombia originally, and when the rubber tapping started in Brazil, or latex tapping started in Brazil, we were taken away from Brazil, and there were genocides in the Putumayo region where my great-grandparents come from. And for me to be able to be here to talk about the fight and the resistance of indigenous people, this goes through this production model that historically is conducted. I know we have important sectors in here like mining and agribusiness that have an impact in the indigenous territories with their productive ways. But for strategies of change so that the lives of our people can be positively impacted and for the people to be preserved out there in the field in several areas in the country, I have been suggesting a conversation between companies and mining companies. So we have been to Belém do Pará because these people have to hear what has to be said. People judge us for delay in Brazil because we still fight to secure the territory and the population that live in it. But I want to say that our people is never heard in round of debate, and we need to be heard. When the Shell representative states that they need to find projects for investment in the communities and in the territories, I believe that a certain practical aspect must be conducted before the projects are put in place. You have to talk to the local people before you build the projects, because our population has solutions that are different for their own territories. So today I'm in a region with the largest water basin in the world, but people don't have access to power or drinking water. Today, more than ever, these people have no drinking water because the only source they had, which was the river, has dried out. And with no power in these villages, one cannot have water. So 48% of the population has no access to power, or if they do, it's 4 hours a night, minimally speaking, to secure some kind of a light for that population. So it's important for us to think about this conversation with the indigenous community, with the riverside communities, with suburbs and black communities. It's not just the black communities that live racism. There is structural racism that impacts people from several areas, even white people that are poor. And we cannot see that. So you occupying these structures, one of the main things for us to move forward and changes is to secure that our voices and bodies occupy strategic positions in your organizations, because we had men that are CEOs of companies that are white, and we don't have, black people, indigenous people, or LGBT people, or other marginalized people that are not at the board of anything in your companies. They are not heading any of your programs. How can you reach out to territories if that kind of approach does not take place? I think we need to place ourselves at a certain risk as an institution, because our marginalized bodies are placing themselves at risk to keep the forests alive and the indigenous people alive. So I dare you to take the risk of investing in us. It's important to take the risk of investing in indigenous crop areas, because funding for reforestation do not reach this kind of a population. Climate funding are not reaching this population that is impacted by environmental racism. And they are mostly impacted by climate changes. So it's important to bring these ends closer to a conversation. And our countries and our people are calling you for this talk. People want to go over with their projects that are ready, that have been built in the south of the country, in the air-conditioned rooms they occupy, but this doesn't meet the social problems at the front. So we have to have an agenda for conversation and for closeness, and our territories and communities are available. And this is not something to be conducted as a harassment, because when one person is called for a conversation, this is a harassment, and this is happening with the carbon market. This cannot be a harassment. We have to have a conversation. Harassment causes problems to our region, it causes conflict, and we do not move forward towards this agenda that needs to reach out to these people. We have a population and a society with no access to water or education, and they have no access to basic rights for us to consider our projects. How can we consider projects when we need to present them to you? When food and water is the word of the day. We cannot write a project for you when you have to chase our meals on that day, and how we can secure meals for children and elders. So don't ask us to prepare you with a project, to prepare a project for you. In fact, that's what I mean. And we, as an indigenous people, do not have time to build or write a project, because we're always fighting for our lives and our territories. And I think that the main agenda that we need as Brazilians is to acknowledge the history of this population in our country, because we are historically violated. They kill us every single day. They kill our stories. They buried the stories of this population here. So how can we perceive ourselves culturally when we deny the history of the indigenous population? What culture do we sell when we're killing our originary culture? Many of you have grandparents that are indigenous, because if you're born in this area, you are a son or a daughter of indigenous people or black people. If you have any foreign descent, it's because of the raping of our indigenous women. So it's important for us to be able to promote this closeness, and I want to be able to talk to each and every one of you, and to present the indigenous population, so that we can find these communities and how to make earn money and to preserve the living forest that is important for our business. And for you to understand that the living forest falls within our territory is important, and we have to be acknowledged as political individuals that we are, to have a voice in the Congress that is taking away our territory with bills that want to take away our territory that was given us to us by law. And we needed to fight for the rights of indigenous people and the lives of indigenous people, because this is important for all the inequalities, particularly the climate change that Brazil needs to meet as a reference. But we're not a reference while the indigenous population is being killed and while the indigenous territories are taken away by the politicians themselves. So my invitation is for you to come and talk to us. We want to talk to you, and we're not against the development of the country. What we are against is the removal of our territory and the decimation of indigenous population, and we fight for life as we fight for our territory. I'm really sorry for taking an extra minutes out of your agenda, and thank you very much for your attention.
Acho que as palmas falam por si, se você quiser.
I think, if you spoke for another 5 minutes, no one would oppose, and the applause here speaks for itself. And I think that your approach on the need for conversation is really important, and not to impose foreign models. I think that this has been the MO for the last 520 years, and I think the last decade has been pretty hard on the Amazon. From 2004 to 2012, Brazil was able to reduce drastically the deforestation, and coincidentally or not coincidentally, this has been a period in which we have seen quite a strong growth in Amazon. Amazon grew at the same rate as China between 2004 and 2012. But social indicators also got a lot better in the region in that period for health and education, so that was really good. The last decade saw the deforestation rate kind of stabilizing, but then growing up. Social indicators in the region deteriorated as well, quite strongly in the last 5 years, and economic indicators also ground to a halt. And that growth rate has basically stalled. Marcelo, you have come from the private sector to the public sector, and you also work in the public-private sector, since the consortium works with government and the private sector as well. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about the challenges that you have ahead of you, but also for you to talk about the opportunities, because everyone in here wants to know how they can engage with the consortium and the region to try and fight the reports such as what Vanda has just provided here. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with good friends, and you've given me a great line for me to continue the debate. I believe that this is being broadcasted online, so to all of you who are listening to us but cannot see us that well, my name is Marcelo. I'm 1.76 meters tall. I'm 59 years old. I'm above weight. I'm using a black pair of pants, a gray shirt, and a blue suit. Wanda, I'm going to try and translate what you said into something that may be the biggest shortage we have in the Brazilian business scenario, which is what we call the green civilism. Let me explain what I mean by that, particularly when it comes to what involves the Amazon. Well, Alter do Chão is a fantastic place, and if you haven't been there, go visit Alter do Chão. But don't turn it into a model, an example of what the Amazon is, because nowadays we have several cars and caravans talking about Alter do Chão and about their journey in the Amazon and the knowledge that they attained in visiting one of the most beautiful places in the Amazon. That's not what we're talking about. We're here talking about the corporate movement and what CEBDS represent to us when it comes to this view of the Amazon. So we have an event that gathers people that take important decisions in society. I haven't seen the list of participants as a whole, but I hope that we have a representative by the justice, a representative of the justice system. Because we need to have echoes in there, because legal proceeding is very slow in Brazil and then trigger impunity and this huge liability for development that we see not just in the Amazon area but the rest of Brazil. I believe that we must have representatives of the legislative in here because laws are drafted in there. And these are not laws that are necessarily signed off on before the vote, particularly when it comes to their impact and how Brazil is to be inserted in the international scenarios with the exchanges we have to conduct, as well as in the relationship with trade and so on. Vanda's presence in here is something that has been drawing a lot of attention to me for a while now. You have been invited for several events, but at the time when it's decision-making time, you're not there. So you are warmly applauded all over the world, but when it's time to make decisions, you are not invited. But we are missing out on a lot of other people that should be invited for that. So what I call civilism. I believe that, I myself worked in the private sector for 30 years, and all of us in here, we have to consider how many visits we do every year to talk to our representatives in government. I'm not talking about lobbying. I'm talking about raising awareness. It's easy for us to get together in conferences such as this one, talk about all of the problems that are so strongly presented at this moment, but stating that the solution has to come from the government, that the federal government has to shake a leg, or the state governments have to shake a leg, or even city halls. It's this corporate cowardice that we have to bring to an end, because this is what it is. It's corporate cowardice. And the answer I give now, it's the same answer I provided when I was CEO. I said, look, I have a responsibility to my peers that keeps me from doing this because there is a risk for the company. So the environmental, the economic, and the social risk, are they not high enough so that we take a faster course of action, so that a partnership, a real partnership, can take place? We are funders of hundreds of initiatives in the Amazon area, hundreds. And a little while ago, we talked to some friends, and we were listing initiatives that had to do with bioeconomy in the Amazon. We came up with over 70 of those, and maybe they can understand that one is doing the rework of the other one. And then they talked about collaboration in there. This meeting is not happening because there is no pre-competitive collaboration. What we have is the willingness for that kind of protagonism, for being the leader and being the carrier of this transformation. And since there is no collaboration between these social entities or corporations, how can we expect a proper cooperation between what's public and private? I think these are the concepts we need to raise at this historical moment in time in Brazil. The Amazon summit in Belém last year to the COP 2030, going through the G20. This is an opportunity that we haven't seen in years in Brazil, and we're going to have other decades ahead of us without that kind of an opportunity. So I'd like to finish off this first round of questions by asking this. What is our agenda, and which agenda are we talking to the government about regarding the G20 positioning? What is the agenda that we're building for COP? Which agenda do we want to include Brazil, Amazon, and all of its biomes in what we're going to be calling Belém plus 10 or Brazil plus 10 after the Paris plus 10 in 2025? So who in here is working with the G20 group or the COP 30 group? But raise your hand if you want to, but I don't want to embarrass anyone. And, reporters like to capture this kind of a thing and turn this into, negative news. But let's not do that now then. So we have 2 years ahead of us that require from us civical responsibility, green responsibility, and it's a responsibility of the president of the country and the Senate and the governors and the city halls, mayors, and everyone in the system. And for us as citizens as well, we have to promote this debate, not just because it's happening. We have to remember that 90% of the municipalities in the Amazon can only be accessed by rivers, which means that this population is not receiving food items, medicine, medical support, and so on and so forth. And they asked me whether the solution would not be to dredge the Amazon rivers as adaptation measures for climate changes. Well, they have never seen the Rio Negro or the Solimões or other rivers. They don't know what dredging is, a challenge in this area. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcelo.
Well, you raise points that I believe are important, and also taking the opportunity to give the floor to our next Marcelo, who, in a way, for the last 20 years has been in the Amazon trying to build that civic action in partnership with governments, not always, but also the private sector in building production chains, Anjos, the local production, also the system along the Xingu River, and that more recently shifted to the private sector to go into business not only socially but also as a business. I'd like to hear a perspective, less historical but more recent, as an entrepreneur, both in terms of challenges to leverage investments for the region, but also implement production systems. What can you bring in terms of inputs to that conversation? But not only looking at the challenges, which we know are many, but also where we have acupuncture points, where we can act and try to transform those bottlenecks and opportunities for regenerative businesses for the region. Nice. Thank you, Gustavo. It's an immense pleasure being here at this roundtable with you. Thank you for the incredible speech, also the Brazilian Business Council for the organization of the event. We are in a historical and turning point. Everyone needs to mobilize. This race for net zero, the involvement by the business sector, especially in the last few years, has been noticeable, but we're still far from reaching solutions that are more adequate to realities such as of the Amazon, the indigenous peoples, traditional communities. We have an abundance of entrepreneurs in the Amazon. We have an abundance in technology, business models. The indigenous peoples, throughout 12,000 years, they created an experience, the biggest agroforest, which is called the Amazon forest. They domesticated species, moved species from one side to the other. I don't know if you know, but this moving and this maneuvering by the indigenous peoples enabled species that we have today and we don't even notice, but it's because of them. For example, chocolate. Cocoa is something that was domesticated by the indigenous peoples and was cultivated by them. So they have lots of technology, lots of knowledge. What we're missing, perhaps, is to incorporate what we have here in this auditorium, in the state of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, to the local needs. Let's have an exercise here. Which companies here have zero carbon targets or they're buying carbon credits? Raise your hand. People or individuals? Yeah, I can't say it very well, but I believe there are a lot of people. How many of you know where the carbon credit comes from? Which territory does it come from? Fewer, even fewer hands raised. And who know how this resource is being invested in this territory? Who knows how this investment is being worked in the territory? Even fewer hands. Well, this is a reflection. The carbon market cannot be separated from these local realities. How can we integrate those issues? I think this is a big challenge. How can we bring the investment that is here in the southeast to the Amazon? Fresson Lamboyan, who is collaborating with the first business booster of the Amazon, he's saying that the risk investor is not going to be able to invest in the Amazon. Marcelo also was an entrepreneur in a fund. I think he learned and still is about it. It's not easy. So as Wanda mentioned, we have to be brave. We have to take chances. So people take chances in the stock market here, but they don't want to take chances in business in the Amazon. So in the Amazon, we really had a learning curve in our investments. We're not able to get not even $1 from more traditional investment funds because we had principles that people looked at and said, but this doesn't work. One of the things we're doing at Mazumana is that from the get-go in the company, we put aside a good portion of equity for the communities. So when we talk to the funds, they said, oh, really? I mean, no, first make money and then you donate something to them. It's all good. And this is what we hear in the fundraising conversations. So perhaps corporate ventures would be a way to go. I've seen a lot of that in the companies here. This movement is growing. They say, oh, but it's a low ticket. Well, but Porta Sinergia, one of the arrangements that is being put together with the Valor Foundation. So there are very few initiatives that actually are going to the field. And this needs to be scaled. There are a few who actually do it, but they say, well, listen, you cannot actually invest your money at Mazumana and expect the same indicators that you have elsewhere. So this needs to change. What is the result? If you want the same financial result, the same way that you're used to in the Southeast with businesses in the Amazon, that's not going to work. If you change your indicators, then it might work. So we need to have that kind of space to take chances, to do things differently. Another point, a difficulty that I see, is dealing with the complexity. People get there and say, oh, this is way too complex. Choose one challenge, one problem, and act on. You can come to a community and say, listen, I just want to buy cocoa, but can I help you with this thing? When you actually establish a relationship with a community, you become a bridge to help and articulate other challenges that this community may have. So dealing with this complexity is something that it's kind of scares people. So focus on something. We have to focus on models and mechanisms that can deal with this complexity. And to wrap it up and also building upon what Marcelo mentioned, you have to go to the ground. You know, I'm talking about just out there, do chão. I'm talking about the villages, the forest. You have to be there and learn. Go there to learn, not to teach. It's not about having cookie cutter solutions. I've made that mistake as an engineer 25 years ago. Oh, we're gonna, bring this to the market because the nuts and the region of São Paulo is much more valued. And they said, listen, good speech, but most of what I know is the river and, living by the river, which is what I know. So you want to do something? Help me go to São Paulo. Let's go together. I set my first businesses, and it's been more than 20 years, along with the riverside communities along the Madeira River. See, we bought 30 tons of Brazilian nuts, and we never actually received the money because the market is a mess. So it's very hard, it's very informal. Logistics is a big issue, and not logistics for the raw material. It's logistics when we talk about the person in the forest that needs to go to the city to have a medical visit. There was this study we conducted with an organization that I helped set up, a health organization there, about the average that a person spends to go to a doctor visit in the city. Can you guess? Let's imagine the amount. 4,000 reais. Why? Because it's 10 days between going and coming, and they're not producing. So, they have to pay for transportation and food and everything. The amount for the actual visit is not as much, but when you consider everything else that is involved, it's much more. So it's not just about the raw material. That's why when they sell the product, they need to receive a higher compensation to offset all the other expenses that they have. Well, I'm going to stop here, but I have more to say later. Obrigado, Marcelo. I think you'll touch upon very important points. The complexity, when you talk about diversity, the 227 species that were cultivated in the Amazon and that have their potential as food, as medicine. Those are very important matters. Well, we only have 3 minutes, and they already told me here we're not going to be able to have a second round, but I'd like to finish, and perhaps if you could take 1 minute, maybe not able for a whole speech, but perhaps list 3 topics that each one of you, perhaps 3 themes that you believe that are very important as we head to COP30 in 2025 in Belém. But from the business perspective, what would be the 3 call to action points that you would share with the business sector when we talk about the engagement with the Amazon? And we're going to go over maybe 1 minute, but I already apologize for. Well, first of all, is to discuss the importance of connecting to what's happening in the world. In the last 12 years, we have gone through the biggest economic and geopolitical change we've had. The United States is launching one of the biggest economical packages in the world. So in the United States alone, 1.7 trillion in the economy, most of it directed to decarbonization, most of it connected to the energy transition. All of that we have to understand. For us to understand that economy and nature are more and more integrated. And we're not part of the round tables when we talk about international standard development. This is very important to us, business owners and all leaderships, private, political, social. It is a time for us to get together. I agree with Marcelo about the global calendar. Brazil will have a role in defending our products, but also as a world diplomat, defending the multilateralism. And that leads me to the second point, which is collaboration. We have to learn how to collaborate. We are still working our problems out there. And I learned from my grandmother, let's work our problems internally. And, I come from a big family, but we have to be a united country with solid data and facts to be able to have this representation in such an important moment as we are. And lastly, so move away from the ego to the eco. because I see that many times we have this dispute in terms of protagonism. No, we have to be united in this process. There's one concept I'd like to share for us not to forget. There's a concept in English that we say overshooting. It's when we start spending more resources than we are putting apart. And every time we step on the ground, we have to try to finish the day contributing more than we are spending. This is very important because we are in a the planning process, and this is very important in that behavior that we have, bringing prosperity, but in a new model, and also reinforcing collaboration, being united in this role that we have with the world. Wanda, your brief considerations? Yeah, my 0 minutes. Well, I think we are in a situation of striving for climate justice. I'd like to invite the institutions to understand this concept of climate justice. Climate justice is a tool to humanize changes. Humanize this facing of climate changes. And humanizing is bringing those marginalized bodies that are socially marginalized to the decision-making spaces, to be listened so that we can build actual changes. To me, the greatest calling now is understanding so that we can reach that climate justice. Racial bodies needs to be part of this decision-making process. While that doesn't happen, all the structures and everything that's been done so far will continue to be done the way they are without any actual change. We have a political scenario important for us to promote changes. If we keep on electing people that are not committed to life of the planet and of society, we'll continue to nourish those policies that we see by the way policies are developed in the country. Indigenous women, we are in the search for occupying political spaces in the country, trying to elect local representatives, also in Congress, in Senate. Without those resources, we're not able to actually have those people placed in decision-making places. So I also invite you to help finance the campaigns for those to be in Congress and so on, so that those who are excluded be part of the political system and can represent those who are excluded. So I thank everyone for this space, and I hope that more indigenous, black, and other women also are part of this conversation. Thank you, Gustavo. COP 2030, 2 years from now. Let's remember that COP is a conference of climate. It's not about forests. It's not about food and agriculture. It's not a conference on energy. These are the three Brazilian pillars: forest, energy, and food, and all its influence and impact on population. We have time to transform those pillars in a debate and conference for the climate. The Arabs, they have food systems and agriculture agenda to be discussed in COP28 in Dubai in a month. So we're going to discuss agriculture and food themes in the desert and the biggest oil producer region in the world. And today, when we talk about the funds for that kind of investments, it comes from the Arabs. So let's see how our future will be, and we have to be there, and let's plan our future. So welcome everyone. Well, real quick, the Amazon is key to fighting climate change. Out of the 10 municipalities that combated the most, 8 are in the Amazon. Altamiras is the biggest emitter, and São Félix do Xingu is the second one. So having substantial policies to work in the Amazon is essential. Any company today needs to have a robust, that doesn't have a robust plan to deal with Amazon is not that along with a climate agenda in its essence. This is the first point. The second, as we make those investments, create mechanisms so that the resources get to the ground. I feel desperate when I see people talking about Amazon, then the resources come to São Paulo. People have Amazon companies in São Paulo, and at the end, we have a kilo of Brazilian nuts, pepper, and the money doesn't get there. I feel desperate when I see that. So this is a key indicator. How much of the resources are being directed to the Amazon and staying there in the hands of the traditional populations that sustain and conserve 60% of the forest that still stands. And the third pointing is to go to the site.
We have to have a macro vision, but we have to be able to go to the place. For example, we are going to extrude in Pitarella, for example, these days, and the native community got together to stop that intrusion there. And the government is kind of, letting go of that debate. This cannot be permitted. The land has been invaded, and the government is doing nothing. So we are between São Félix do Xingu and Altamira. This is one of the areas with the highest level of deforestation. So try and choose local projects to gain depth. Otherwise, it's going to be too generic. Very good. Thank you very much, everyone, to the members of the panel, to CEBDS. And I think that, this is a complex topic and we need more time to promote that debate. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now it's time for the picture. I'd like to thank you all for your attention and cooperation during this morning. For those of you who are in here in the auditorium and for those at home. We've finished the first step of the Sustainable 2023, but there's a lot more. I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this possible. We're going to have a break for lunch and we're back at 2 p.m. sharp. All right, folks, have a great lunch. We're back at 2. Thank you.